I'm psychologist Dr. Bryan Violet. Today I'll be sitting down with Father Sam Kachuba. We'll be talking about Lord of the Rings, misconceptions about the priesthood, his training to be a Catholic psych mentor, and the Sinner in a Movie of the Week, his choice, once. This is the Catholic Sinner Show. I was thinking about what I wanted to talk to you about, and it just hit me square in the eyes that why am I attempting to come up with peripheral topics which may be interesting when really the only thing I want to talk about is Lord of the Rings? So why don't we just talk about Lord of the Rings anyway?
We might as well.
We might as well. I know you have a love for it.
I do.
I obviously have a love for it. We have the series on the channel, which I'm going through the chapters with rotating guests for the series, but I never have an opportunity on camera to talk about it as it. I'm just going through the content.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So tell me about your experience with Tolkien's work. I guess let's start with yours, and then maybe we'll get a little bit broader. When was your first experience reading the text?
I think I was probably in maybe 4th or 5th grade, and my dad read The Hobbit to me. And that was probably one of the last, there's an age where like your parents don't read to you anymore, even though like it's a good thing.
Yeah.
There's a whole book on the reading challenge about this dad who read to his daughter every single day through college.
Wow.
Yeah. He would call her on the phone and he would just read her like 10 minutes. He'd read to her for 10 minutes. It was awesome. And they talk about all the stuff that it does for the child to have that time with their parents, reading to them and everything. And that's one of the things I remember my dad reading to me, and probably one of the last things that we read together. But that was like my first exposure to The Hobbit. And I don't think I got it, but I knew what it was. I had the sense of the Hobbit, the dwarves, the elves, and all this other cool stuff that Tolkien brings in. So there was something captivating about that world that he had created. And then The Lord of the Rings was there for when I was older. And that was clear that I had to wait till I was older to get there.
Yeah, I think there's something about Lord of the Rings that points back to childhood, and then there's something about The Hobbit that points forward to adulthood. So when I read The Hobbit when I was very young, it was a childhood story, but then there was something about it which was not just beyond me in the sense that it was high level, but there's a part of me that it was just hard. It was just painful. There was just suffering in it. And I was still in the innocence of my youth. And it really exposes you to grief and sorrow and strife and loneliness, darkness. And I was in like 4th, 5th grade, or similar to your age. Yeah. And so he really brings you along and matures you. But I didn't know it. I actually didn't finish The Hobbit the first time I read it. I stopped in Mirkwood with the experience with the spiders. Yeah. And he gets lost in the woods. Bilbo gets lost in the woods.
That's that's a hard one. It's hard.
It's very dark. And Tolkien has an awesome way of having a difficult chapter and then like a resting chapter. But that was one of the difficult chapters. I mean, he gives you a whole chapter of rest because the difficult chapter is very difficult. Yeah. And for a little kid, it was a bit much for me. And I didn't put the book down and say, I'm done reading this. But it was more like, I'm going to take a little break and I'll come back. And then I never did. It's like I couldn't bring myself to carry the cross.
Well, it's because it can be too much.
Yeah. And
you start to think, well, I don't think I should go back to that. I remember talking to a kid and she was telling me about how she really liked Harry Potter, but she got to the 3rd or 4th Harry Potter book. And she said, I don't think I'm ready for this yet.
They get dark. Those get really dark too.
Yeah. And I was really impressed by her own self-knowledge that this kid could say, I'm not sure I'm capable of continuing with this at the moment. I'd like to get there eventually. I'd like to read it. I want to get there, but I'm too young right now and I'm going to wait. I admired that. Yeah. But I think I got to the Lord of the Rings, I'd say early in high school.
How close was that in proximity to the films?
So the films came out late in high school for me, junior or senior year, with the first one came out. So I had read the books before the movies came out. But I don't think I had read the books with a deep sense of understanding just yet. So I knew the story. I knew what happened. And I was excited about the movies coming. I remember being really excited about the movies. And I remember not being disappointed for a minute with the movies.
Well, yeah.
And that was huge because I think the movies gave me another frame of reference for it. But at the same time that I was watching the movies for the first time, one of my best friends had read Lord of the Rings, also saw the movies, and was also really into it. He's also a priest.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was really helpful that this guy, we were in the seminary at the time, I think by the time the last movie came out, we were both in the seminary. So we'd watch them, and then we kind of challenged each other to go back and reread. So we'd go back and reread the story. And then I just kind of fell into this habit of every year or two, I would pick up Lord of the Rings again, and I would just read it.
And it's a different read every time.
Every time.
Yep.
Every time. And so this is a thing that I was thinking about with just the cycle of readings that we have at Mass. Now, I'm a priest long enough that I've been through the cycle of readings a few times. And you go through that cycle of readings a few times, and after your first go through, you're like, am I going to have anything left to preach about? I've already talked about all these readings at least once.
Sure.
Is there anything left for me?
Sure.
And then you realize, yeah, there's a lot, actually. There's a ton of stuff here.
Sacred scripture.
Yeah, exactly. It's never ending. There's always stuff that you can find.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that was going to happen with Tolkien also.
Tolkien,
Yeah.
Well, you're mining spiritual depths. He was a very Catholic man, a daily communicant, as far as I understand things.
Whenever he could.
Yeah. And he talked about, even if I unconsciously wrote this book in a Catholic context, I consciously edited it to be a Catholic book. Yeah. And it's one of the few things that I think Catholics can claim as cool, that the whole larger world can see as cool, and we could say that's ours, but still people try and explain it away as something beyond what is Catholic or even beyond what is Christian. Yeah. But it's Catholic.
Have you seen Holly Ordway's book, the Tolkien's Faith?
Mm-mm.
She just published it with Word on Fire, and she basically dismantles any other attempt to read Tolkien as anything other than very Catholic.
Yeah.
But she does it in such a unique way. So her whole premise is that Tolkien, by his own testimony, wanted Lord of the Rings to be a Catholic work.
Yeah.
He had this understanding. And at first he says it was kind of unconscious because he was just writing from his own it was
unconscious projection.
Interior. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the symbolism, the very ideas that he had of like how the world would function, they're all deeply Catholic.
Yeah.
And even the way that he writes his characters and their flaws is deeply Catholic.
Yeah.
Because what you find is that all the characters, the best heroes, still have flaws. And there's something so profound about that when you realize that your heroes sometimes are not going to be perfect, which is different from a lot of the other myths. And this is a thing that Tolkien was an expert in, right? It was mythology.
Sure.
So if he's looking at these myths, and certain characters in the myths are always
not God,
the superhero.
Well, they're always not in Tolkien's work. They're not. None of them are God.
Right.
Yes.
Right. But so many of the heroes in other myths are God or gods of some sort, right?
Yes.
And what he was kind of pointing to is, no, we have a story that points to an even greater reality.
Yes.
And so all of the heroes, all of the flawed characters, whoever it is that we're talking about in a Tolkien story, points us to something that's greater. The other thing that Tolkien does, which very few of, I mean, I'm not as familiar with the fantasy genre as maybe I should be. But
you should be more familiar.
Yeah. But one of the things that he does is he brings in prophecy.
Uh-huh.
And not only does he bring in prophecy, but actually the Silmarillion is the prophecy, right?
Well, it's the Old Testament.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But that's actually precisely how we read Scripture.
Yeah. The deep historical dimension to it, just like Scripture. I mean, when you learn about Christ, you learn about how he's related to David, from the line of David.
Yeah.
And you learn about Aragorn.
He's talking about a very real place.
Of Elendil. Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's a historical book in some ways.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fantasy historical, but
there's an inner logic. It's real.
Yeah. It's an inner logic. Yeah, I was thinking what you're saying about none of them being God, none of the characters being God and having flaws. I mean, you don't need to look any further than Frodo himself. Frodo is the hero of the book, and he fails.
Yeah.
And only providence is what destroys the ring. There's something which transcends Frodo and Gollum, and he, from an act of mercy, it enables God to act circumstantially on what happened to destroy the ring. I've also heard it talked about the most direct intervention of God in Tolkien is the eagles, because Manwë, not to get super nerdy, but Manwë is one of the Valar. He's the lead of the Valar,
right,
which is layered on Saint Michael.
Okay.
And just as Morgoth, Sauron's boss, is Satan.
Right.
He took from Christian mythology. I use that word properly, Christian myth, which influenced his work. And then that's what the Silmarillion's all about. A lot, the early sections of the Silmarillion were our creation narrative.
Right.
And so Manwë of the Valar is the god of the air and the winds. And so Manwë, Saint Michael, is the closest to the heart of Iluvatar, who is God the creator. And so they're like in one in mind, like Saint Michael and God, who is like unto God, right?
Right.
And so anytime in The Hobbit and in Lord of the Rings, where things are seemingly hopeless, all of a sudden the eagles show up and change the course of history.
Yeah.
That is God intervening on the world in Tolkien's mind.
Yeah. I think
the eagles, use the wind and the air. Manwë personally sends the eagles.
Right. Yeah, I think the eagles we can see it as God's intervention. I think we can also see it as the eagles properly ordering themselves.
Say more.
So if you look at the eagles, they have speech, which we don't always see that with the different animals. So, for example,
except the fox, my boy.
The fox, yes, I love the fox early. But like when they get on the horses, Shadowfax has reason in a certain way,
but not speech.
But he doesn't speak.
Yeah.
Right. There's a communication that he's able to have with the other creatures, like with the other horses, but he's not able to. He doesn't actually say anything. But if you look at the eagles, they speak in the common speech to Gandalf. They have these conversations.
They have their own language, and they can speak in common.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that ability to communicate. So there's something there where they're able to communicate, but then we see them like rightly ordering themselves. So much like the other creatures that have speech and everything else, they also have the ability to choose to do something. And just in the same way that Gandalf can't carry the ring, and all these others are not able to be the ring bearer, well, the same thing is true for the eagles.
Sure.
They can't be the ring bearer.
Sure.
But the eagles know that that there is a role for them to play. And part of that role is vigilance. So when we see the eagles, it's always because
everything.
We saw this happening.
Yes.
And when we saw this happening, we knew it was time for us to step in.
Yes.
Because there's a role that only the eagles can play. There's no other creature in Middle Earth that could fly into Mount Doom and rescue those who needed to be rescued.
Sure.
Right.
And they were wild and untamed also.
Right.
When you first are introduced to them in the Hobbits, they're actually a bit frightening. You don't know what they're going to do.
Well, exactly. In the Hobbit, I think they're much more frightening than they are in Lord of the Rings.
Right. Because the first time you encounter them is through Gandalf.
Right. But in Lord of the Rings, there's this sense of they might eat Frodo, or Bilbo rather. They're ready to eat him, and they're kind of threatening to him, and he's not sure, and they're not sure what they want to do with him either.
Right.
By the time you get to Lord of the Rings, the eagles, maybe this is just Tolkien developing the characters a little bit more.
Yeah.
But you get into that with the eagles, and they're the only ones who can get there. There's no other creature that can rescue Frodo and Sam, and
Frodo and Sam and what, another person? It was just Frodo and Sam.
No, Gollum.
Yeah, but Gollum was dead at that point.
But they sent an eagle for him.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So there's this hope that Gollum can be saved.
Yeah.
So Gollum was there in Mount Doom, and it's not just that the eagles saw, they received the message.
Yes.
Go and keep watch. They saw that Gollum was there.
Well, they had just come from the Black Gate battle, because they at first
Because they're dropping stones on everybody too during the Blackgate battle, right?
Well, they came.
Or is that in the Battle of the
Five Armies?
Five Armies.
Hobbit.
Yeah, sorry.
At the Blackgate, they
I'm
showed
mixing things.
At the Blackgate, they showed up to. They basically went toe to toe with the Nazgul.
Yeah, right.
They went toe to toe with the Nazgul, who were just hovering over the whole battle and casting a dark shadow and the Black Death of fear on all the. I mean, they were outnumbered anyway, but it bought the company and the Men of Gondor time.
But you also see there's something fundamentally good about the Eagles, because when they show up, that dark shadow that's been cast over the whole battle starts to move.
It lifts, yeah.
It lifts because now there's something. It's not just a battle on the ground.
Yeah.
Now those armies that are at the Black Gate are supported by the very same thing that the armies coming out of the Black Gate are being supported by. Or they have air support now. Yeah. And air support changes the whole battlefield.
It does. It does. And the imagery around light and dark is just so critical. Yeah. It's so critical. And I mean, you think of it in very Christian Catholic terms, and Christ is the light. And I'm always struck by is the power of the Nazgul. As terrifying as they are, their power is actually based in stealth and in secret and in darkness. They won't openly. I mean, they can openly confront, but it's not the fullness of what they do to your mind and your mentality and your fear and in the darkness.
It's always about the darkness that came over the heart.
Yeah, I always wonder about him as an author too, because he really must have done some soul searching to be able to describe evil the way he does.
When you realize his life, I mean, he fought in World War I.
Yeah.
And actually became so sick from the trench fighting that he had to be medically removed from the military.
Yeah.
And then his own sons served in World War II. Mm-hmm. He lost friends, close personal friends in World War I. He saw the sons of his friends being killed in World War II. Mm-hmm. He had a deep understanding of suffering, to say nothing of the fact that his father died when he was very, very young.
But not just suffering. I mean, evil. I mean, he writes evil very well.
Yeah. But I think before you can write evil well, you have to have an understanding of suffering. Like, there's got to be an understanding of that there is something in the world that's beyond my explanation. Mm-hmm. And then you see there's a difference, a distinction between suffering that is a sadness, right? So,
which is the appropriate response to loss.
Correct.
Yes.
Right. My father dies, so there's an appropriate sadness. Mm-hmm. But then to realize that there's this evil that's much greater, that's causing us to go to war.
Sure.
And then to see the destruction caused by war and how different that is from the destruction caused by disease.
Yes.
My father got sick and died, he says, but then he's looking at his friends and what the machine guns are doing and what the gases are doing and the way that human life is being disregarded. Yeah. And they're just being sent up over the trench and out onto the battlefield to slaughter each other.
Certainly evil.
And you start to realize there's an evil that's present that is different than any other thing that we've ever seen. So this isn't tragedy in the sense of it's just something sad that's happened. This is actually evil, which makes him then capable of writing. And you see the difference, right? You see the difference between, say, the tension, the friction that Boromir has with his father, and that Faramir has trying to live in Boromir's shadow, and how Faramir's trying to always win his father's approval, but struggles.
He writes about temptations to moral evil.
Right.
Yes.
So you have that, but then you also have the utterly evil orcs, the utterly evil Balrog. You have these creatures that the thing that you know about them is that this is evil. Like Gandalf telling them, run.
But my point, though, is there's different types of evil that he writes so well about. So what you're talking about is, big scary monster, run.
Yeah.
Like that, we've seen that many, many times. But he writes about the terror of evil. And he does it in such a way that, it's kind of the way evil sneaks up on us in life. Mm-hmm. He'll just be writing about something sort of neutral emotionally, and then suddenly something dark is happening, and you're almost like hit with whiplash. that you didn't even know it was coming. So I'm thinking of when the Frodo and Pippin and Sam are marching through the Shire for the first time, and they're just kind of in a light mood, and they're pushing their way through the brambles, and it's a nice bright sunny day, and they look up, and all of a sudden there's a dark rider standing up there. Or when they're in Weathertop and there's a fire and they're sitting there, and all of a sudden Frodo just looks out, and he's being pensive and reflective, and against the black of the night there's an even blacker spot that is slowly creeping up. It's like it's sobering. Mm-hmm. And I've experienced that kind of evil in my life, where you don't even know till it's almost too late that it's upon you. Yeah. It's like just sneaks up quickly, and it's dark, and you're like, oh, what just happened? How did I get here?
Right.
And now I'm suddenly in a very dangerous place. It's not just a big, loud, scary orc or troll.
Right.
Like that's typically not the most dangerous of evil. It's the subtle,
right,
insidious.
Well, and Gollum is such a great character for this because of how he develops. And Peter Jackson does a good job in the movies of showing Gollum from the time that he steals the ring.
Yeah.
It's my birthday present, right?
Yeah.
So it starts with a lie.
And a murder.
And a murder, right? So we've got the lie of the devil to Adam and Eve. We've got the murder of Cain and Abel.
Sure.
And then it progresses to, what does he do? He wants to stay away from the light.
Yes.
So Gollum starts to avoid, or Smeagol starts to avoid the light. As he starts to avoid the light, everything about him starts to change.
Yeah, he starts to wither.
And it's this, you see the effect of evil on him.
Yeah.
But you also see how it works over time. Mm.
And the comfort he finds in the darkness and the cool.
Yeah.
Because the light hurts so much.
Right.
One day he looked up and he felt this pain on the back of his neck, and he realized it was the sun.
Yeah.
And he shook his fist at the sun, and he saw the misty mountains and said, wow, there's probably some nice, cool places for me there. It's still, we talk about in the clinical world. Mm-hmm. And this goes all the way back to like foundations laid by Thomas Aquinas of how we're created good and we always pursue good.
Right.
And so we try and discover in clinical work, you try and find the underlying positive of that thing that we're pursuing, which is we would all agree is a good thing. Right. I mean, you can think of the great villains in fiction or in real life. They believed they were doing what was right. And if you pull away the layers, you can say, I get what you're going for there. And, I can understand Gollum wanting relief from suffering. I want relief from suffering too.
Right.
Twisted, perverted, confused, disordered, but I get it. And I think that's like the basis for Gandalf always pushing for the possibility of his redemption.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, where that notion of pity comes from. It was pity that stayed Bilbo's hand. Mm-hmm. It's pity that Frodo is encouraged to cultivate, that Gandalf wants Frodo to cultivate towards Gollum. He says, Gollum might be helpful for you at some point. Even though we see that evil, to recognize that even somebody who is so lost doesn't necessarily have to be irretrievably lost. And that's another piece of Tolkien's Catholicism that comes out.
Yeah.
Because his understanding of God's mercy and the possibility of being saved, the possibility of not being completely lost, which is so important because, I mean, if literature points us to anything, we want it to point us to something that's hopeful.
Yes.
Part of the reason that...
I don't know about modern literature.
But if you come back on that theme, that you have the nobody's good, goodness never pays off. Yeah. Right? Like it's the Spaceballs, good is dumb. Right?
Now you know.
Yeah. But if you look at how Lord of the Rings ends, you've got the triumph in battle, finally. The ring is destroyed.
Yes.
But then they have to go back to the Shire. Yeah. Where they discover that actually the very evil that they've been fighting has finally infected the Shire.
Yes, movie watchers don't know this.
Right, exactly. But the scouring of the Shire is so important because they come back, they discover this evil that they've been fighting. It's right there. But there's a difference.
Yes.
Because now these hobbits that have gone off and done battle,
Yes.
they're not intimidated by the evil that they see anymore in the way that they were when they first saw the Balrog or when they first saw the orcs.
Yes.
Now they come back and they know what they must do.
Yes.
And they're not just fighting for they started fighting for the world.
Yes.
And now they're the ones who get to fight for their homeland. Whereas, the men of Gondor were fighting for Gondor.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
The riders of Rohan were fighting for their land. The hobbits never had to do that.
No, they lived in a very sheltered experience, which, not to plug the other series, but I make the argument that, a lot of the hobbits in general aren't as perfect as Peter Jackson makes them out to be. That they're flawed just like any other race, and they live in fear of adventure and danger, and they live in this very insulated bubble world. But they're also really interested in what's going on, and they rumor monger, and they gossip, but they never step it up and go on adventures themselves.
I don't think I ever thought of that part.
Yeah, and so, but they needed some of them, the best of them, the leaders of them, needed to be removed from that world, from their world, and participate in the larger world, the larger narrative of what's going on, in order to reorder the Shire in its proper way, which is in a certain sense kind of adorable when you think of the other battles that occurred before then, and you hear the good old hobbits, like, it's you kind of like can't even take it seriously,
right?
They're the militias gathering by the flagpole. It's not, they're not the prowess of Nazgul and Oliphants and Legolas and like these epic battles, but it's like a miniature version of that. But it is unfortunate that moviegoers don't know about that, who haven't read the books, because Gandalf himself even says that's what this whole story is about for you hobbits. Don't you know that this is all about? For you to grow so you can handle your own business.
Right.
I'm not going to go with you back to the Shire. You don't need me anymore. It's like a parent saying to a child, like, this is all preparatory. You have grown. Now you can handle your own business.
Which brings you to the whole idea of the ascension.
Say more about that.
All right. So after the resurrection, Jesus appears to the apostles for 40 days.
Oh, now I'm with you.
Right.
Yeah.
And he spends that time with them. But what's he doing? He's really preparing them for the mission.
Mm-hmm.
He's preparing them for that time when the mission will be, you guys go off and you're going to do the thing that I've commanded you to do. I've sent you out to preach the gospel to all the world, to baptize in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. So go. And I'm going to leave so that you have to go and do this on your own.
Mm-hmm.
You won't always have me walking here with you. I will remain with you always, just not in this bodily form.
Yeah.
And so he ascends into heaven.
Right.
And the apostles see him taken up, and they have to pause. They have to take some time. They take 9 days in prayer before Pentecost.
Wait, what are we supposed to do?
Yeah, exactly. They're like, before we start doing this thing, let's just make sure that we've prayed for a little while, because it's a big deal.
9 days too.
Yeah.
A little novena.
This is a serious thing that we've just been charged to do. So we're going to have to take some time with this.
Yeah.
But it's that idea, I'm not going to be here. Gandalf has been constantly moving around and visiting the different peoples.
Mm-hmm.
So as he's on his travels, Gandalf as the wizard, he's
the Grey Pilgrim.
He's there to protect Middle Earth.
Yes.
Part of his mission is the protection of Middle Earth.
I love his rebuttal to Denethor, the steward.
Yeah.
Do you not know that I am also a steward? But not of Gondor.
Right.
Of all things. Yeah. Of all that is good.
Yeah. So he has this role, which is to make sure that things are taken care of.
Yeah.
And that means he also has a role to teach.
Mm-hmm.
And so along the way, what do you see him teaching? He teaches Aragorn to own his identity and to really
in the movies.
In the movie, it's true.
I have a gripe with Aragorn.
It's heavier in the movies.
It's not there at all in the books. In the books, he's like, I'm the king of Gondor. Who wants some of this? And that happened way before the actual books, because Elrond placed the doom on him that said he fell in love with Arwen.
Right.
And Elrond was like, all right, you can marry my daughter, but she's not settling for anything less than the king of Gondor. So stop being a ranger in the woods, get your act together, and earn my daughter's hand.
You got to go.
And that was like 40 years before Lord of the Rings, the book. So you don't see self-doubt about his royalty in the books. But in the movie, it's like all this self-doubt. And,
in the movie, you're right, that doubt comes out. But I guess I mean the sense of Gandalf like teaching him, here's how you're going to do it. Here are the things that now it's time for you to do this. So Gandalf becomes more the indicator for like the time is right. He's a guide still to Aragorn.
What do you think? What examples are you thinking of?
I'm thinking of like when he goes to the armies of the dead. Like,
but Gandalf doesn't encourage him to do that.
I thought Gandalf encourages that.
No. So they get separated. Gandalf and Aragorn.
Oh, you're right.
And the cool thing, and this is something I actually quote to a lot of my clients, something Gandalf says about Aragorn. If the client is typically male and nerdy enough and likes Lord of the Rings, I bring this up because at one point, Gandalf is in Minas Tirith in Gondor, and he's talking, kind of musing out loud, talking to Pippin, and he's trying to understand why Sauron his forces are moving. And he's just sitting there and thinking, and he's like, it must have been Aragorn. He must have looked into the Palantir.
Right.
And he says, that makes sense. And this is what I use with my clients. He is a man that can take his own counsel. What a line.
That's a good line.
What a line. I want to be a man that can take his own counsel.
Yeah.
Yes, I want the counsel of others. It's not a pride thing. It's not a narcissistic, prideful thing. But in that moment where I need to make a decision and step up and assertively decide something, like Aragorn is affirmed by Gandalf from a distance. They're not even in the same place, but he's saying, yeah, he's on my level. He doesn't need me to guide him.
Well, and then Aragorn has that, he's got that magic of his own.
Aragorn?
Yeah.
In what sense?
So think of like the houses of healing.
Oh, yes.
It's Aragorn as the king who's able to lay his hands on people and bring them to healing.
It's so, how do you not see Jesus?
Yeah, no, of course. Of course.
Yeah.
And that's another thing I love.
The hands of the king are the hands of a healer. Yeah.
Right. One of the things I love in Lord of the Rings is how it's not that this one figure is Jesus.
They're all.
Gandalf fell and then came back as Gandalf the White, so he died and rose again. So he's Jesus. Well, yeah.
Well, what about Frodo carrying the bird and the cross?
Exactly. Yeah. And what about Sam?
Right.
Holly Ordway says that Samwise is the real hero of the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
That it's yes, obviously Frodo is heroic, and we can't have the story without Frodo, but Frodo wouldn't have gotten far without Sam.
Yeah. What about for you? What about for you personally? Who do you ride or die with? Who is your character in the whole thing? You have to pick one.
Yeah.
Who is it?
I think it's Pippin.
Pippin?
Yeah.
What an interesting answer.
I think there's just something about, Pippin and Merry for me are actually kind of hard to distinguish at a certain point. Like they just kind of, they bumble along together, but there's something about that, I think that bond, that relationship.
Yeah.
But also about the way that they're both ready to, when the switch finally gets flipped for them, mm-hmm. and they realize that they're part of something much bigger than the Shire. Which came,
yes, well, in Pippin's case, which came as a result of someone suffering and dying for him.
Right.
When he was moved by the love of Boromir, that flipped the switch.
Yeah. And so they want to give something of themselves mm-hmm. to someone else that they had no prior connection to.
Because they first received.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And having received, they're ready to be all in.
Mm-hmm.
And they're ready to be all in against everybody else's wiser counsel.
Mm-hmm.
Like Gandalf doesn't want them to do this.
No.
But they're both going to dive in. And so
one's
offering his services to Theoden, one's offering his services to...
Well, Gandalf has parts. Because he also argued that they should go on be a part of the Fellowship in favor of Glorfindel, the Elf Lord, who Elrond wanted. Elrond was against them going, and especially against Pippin going.
Right.
And Gandalf said, "I think we should trust to their friendship rather than to might in arms." And so he advocated for them to go on the quest.
Yeah.
But yes, you're right. He was also just like, stay out of it as much as you can.
But this whole idea of recognizing how small they are, and yet desiring to be part of something that's very big, and that's beyond them.
For love only.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then there's also this piece where they're able to call that out of others. So I think of them with Treebeard.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And that scene where he says, "But you're part of this world, aren't you?"
Yeah.
That he's understood. He understands, as small as I am, the hobbit that I am, I've been invited into something much bigger.
Well,
and I want this world to be better. And if I want this world to be better, I have to do everything that I can. I need these guys. I need the Ents to understand that they're part of this world too.
Right. Which is a new insight for him.
Right.
Because his whole life was, we're in the Shire, we're safe here, we don't want to know what's going on out there. And then Treebeard basically makes the same argument. We're just going to live it out. We're going to weather the storm. We're not going to get involved.
Which is funny because the Ents are the biggest of the creatures.
I know.
And the hobbits are the smallest.
Yeah, it actually has nothing to do with physical prowess.
Right.
It has to do with interior disposition.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So Pippin, of all characters, that's cool. I think I asked you kind of an unfair question because I don't have an answer at the tip of my tongue. If I had to choose one,
who do you go with?
I think I just admire Aragorn too much, and I know that's so cliched, but it's
okay.
I know
you're allowed to have cliches.
I know. I've matured by saying it's okay to agree with popular opinion. But I just love I love the Ranger narrative. Yeah. I love the silent humility of guarding and protecting and being treated terribly and having the strength of spirit to not care. Not care how poorly people treat you, and for generations without any glory whatsoever or recognition or affirmation to serve the innocent and the vulnerable. Like, I admire that to no end. Yeah. And of course, it comes to fruition, and he has earned the right to be the king of Gondor because of that. He could not have lived his kingship in service of others had he not begun in service of others. Right. Or else he would have been Sauron. He would have been a tyrant. It's service for me rather than service for you. That's the big difference. But the years in the wild, which were preparatory for, all of this is this theme that keeps coming up. The quest for the hobbits was preparatory for them to go home and deal with their stuff. Aragorn's experience in the wild was preparatory for him to become the king. In our lives, everything we do is preparatory for what's coming later. Yeah. There's a thread that we can pull through our entire lives.
Yeah. And that thread that gets pulled through our entire lives, we realize does have an end goal. Yes. And Aragorn's end goal is to once again be king in Gondor.
And marry Arwen, which isn't a bad.
It's not a bad one, no. Yeah. It's a good goal. Yes. Who doesn't love Liv Tyler, right? But beautiful. All right, tell me about Tom Bombadil, because this has always been for me the character that is
stumbling block.
I don't want to say a stumbling block because I'm so fascinated by him. Yeah, but he's the one where I wish that Tolkien told us more. Yeah, I wish there was more about Tom Bombadil. Besides the Nickel Creek song.
It's a great song.
It's right.
Yeah. Well, I've heard. There are a lot of interpretations. Tolkien himself said, "I don't know who he is." It was a character that he wrote from his unconscious, and it never made it.
His kids had a doll named Tom Bombadil.
Yeah, but it never made its way into his conscious mind that he knew what he was writing about. He was writing about something, but he wasn't quite sure. Yeah. I think I'm inclined to believe that Bombadil represents the innocence of the garden. He represents, not him entirely, but the symbolism associated with not being affected by sin as of yet. Yeah. Something primordial. He's oldest. Older than everything. And then, you think about when
the ring has no power over him.
No power over him. Sin had no power, until the fall, but had no power in the garden. And then you think of that when he rescues the hobbits from the Barrow Downs, and afterwards they're naked without shame.
Yeah.
On the grass, rolling around in the sunlight. It's not sexual.
Right.
There's just pure innocence.
Right.
And Tom would defeat the darkest, most terrible shades of the Barrow Downs, who are zombies essentially.
Right.
Kings, corrupted kings.
But he sings to them
with song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He sings to them.
The innocence and the purity of just skipping around like unaffected.
It's like that's the last piece of The Hobbit.
Yeah.
There was a time when I wondered if, to bring The Hobbit into it, like if Tom Bombadil and Beorn had any connection to one another.
Yeah.
There's something about the House of Beorn, like the bear man.
Sure.
And Tom Bombadil.
They're very close to nature.
So close to nature. Caring for creatures, right?
Yes.
So Beorn has his horses, his ponies. He takes care of the bees. He's got a garden.
Yes.
Bombadil has the garden. It's like the description of the houses are so similar. It's just that Beorn is rough, and Beorn might show up as a bear and kill you.
Yeah. He's a bit more dangerous.
Whereas Tom Bombadil is like, oh, hey, you're here. Isn't that great?
Yes.
I mean, the reason that he can't hold on to the ring is because he'd probably forget about it.
It holds no sway over him.
Probably forget that he even had it at all.
Had no sway over him at all. He's uncorrupted by it.
Right.
Tom is his own master.
Yeah.
That's what they say. He is master. Who is Tom? Goldberry, his wife, says. He is as you see him. He's talking about being in self. Yeah. Fully integrated.
Exactly.
He's completely in self. There's no defensive personality defenses. He's just completely integrated, and he's unaffected by everything. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the best explanation I have, is that it's like unsullied by the stain of sin.
So is he there as the reminder then to the hobbits of what could be? Is he there? What's his place in Middle Earth? Or is he's in Middle Earth, but not of Middle Earth? Like there's this...
What should be, perhaps what should be, or what God's original design was.
But then that's the kind of thing that, all right, Tolkien writing, bringing in all these things from his own experiences, bringing in his own faith and his own worldview.
Yeah.
I wonder where Tolkien saw that in the world that he grew up in.
Yeah.
Like, where did he see the world as it was supposed to be?
Psychologically. Yeah. Maybe he had like a jolly uncle or something that was just always loving. Or...
Well, but even there, he's very honest about his relationships with other people, with the priests the Oratorians who really helped to raise him once his mother died.
Yeah.
He's very honest even about his relationship with his wife, which is an imperfect relationship, right? It's a very happy marriage, but it's imperfect.
Sure.
He even writes about some of his regrets with his kids, like the things that he wished he had taught them, or the things that he didn't think he'd spent enough time telling them about, or the things that he thinks he overdid with them. And he writes them these letters where he's confessing it almost.
Yeah.
So where did he see life as it should be?
I don't know. I think it's probably buried in his unconscious.
Yeah.
If he said, I don't know, I don't understand who Tom is. I mean, that's an interesting thing. And you hear about writers whose characters reveal themselves to the author as they're writing them.
Yeah.
It's not part of a grand design. And there's an artistic element to it. It's an unconscious projections, parts of the self. And I think he just didn't get around to working out in his mind who the character is.
I'm so fascinated by it. I love every time I come back to it, I want to know more. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing that keeps me coming back to Lord of the Rings at the end of the day, is that there's so much there that reminds me of Scripture. Not the story.
Yeah.
But the way that coming back to it, you get something else.
Yeah.
You notice something else that you never noticed before.
Yeah.
And the more you notice, well, you're going to notice it again the next time. And it's not just that you're noticing it again the next time, but the next time you're noticing something else adjacent to it.
Yeah.
And that other thing that you're noticing, that other little detail, is now helping you to understand even better why this part of the story is so powerful.
Yes.
And that happens the more you're reading Scripture. As you're reading the gospel and you start to become more familiar with it, the more you read the Old Testament and you see how these prophecies, these things that were foretold of Christ, are being fulfilled in the New Testament. It starts to enrich the whole experience overall. And as you're understanding more and more, you can't help but notice also like present day applications. And this is why you and I like to go back and forth with references to Lord of the Rings, because there's these little moments where like, that's Lord of the Rings right there.
Yeah.
Whatever just happened, that's a Lord of the Rings thing.
I want to take the opportunity today to talk to you about it. I had possible other topics, but it was honestly, at the end of the day, it's really the only thing I actually want to talk about. I once got to a point where musically, it's like, I think I only just want to listen to the blues from now on, no matter what. Like Tolkien, I guess I think we should say something too about how in an anti-religious world that we live in, people still long for God, and his presence in this work is a way that people can unconsciously access him, even though consciously they won't allow themselves to, or they've been hurt, or they don't want to commit, or I mean, whatever. There's a myriad of reasons. I don't want to overgeneralize about why people don't live a life of faith. But I still think like the popularity of Tolkien's work isn't diminishing. They're coming out with new movies.
Yeah.
They're coming out with new shows.
He's not going anywhere.
He's not going anywhere. And it's...
Have you seen the new Rings of Power?
I have.
What'd you think? I haven't seen it.
I have. I think people give it a bad rap.
Okay.
I think that there's a very conservative, traditionalist audience that pushes back against a liberal or woke culture or agenda.
Okay.
And so when they learn things like there are female leads, or there are African American elves, and it's like Tolkien would never have a black elf, So there's like a visceral pushback, and I think it's unfair.
When you're saying traditionalists, like conservative traditionalists, like Tolkien conservative traditionalists, like they're so conservative about Tolkien, or do you mean like they're conservative traditionalists in the sense of like politically, sociologically?
Yes.
Both.
Yes. All of the above. Yeah, all of the above.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. No, I think all the above, and I think because of the discrepancy between a traditionalist set of values and more of a progressive set of values, it's very common to situate things under progressive projects from a conservative viewpoint, and then throw the baby out with the bathwater. And the reality for me, my experience of observing an elf who was black was like, that was an awesome actor. Like I didn't even, there's a black dwarf female. Like she was great. Like I didn't. I think there are projects where an agenda is pushed. I think there's some Star Wars projects recently where it was like, she's not even good, and you're making her the villain of this whole show. I'm thinking of the Obi-Wan series that came out not long ago.
Okay.
But I thought Rings of Power there's like, that was fine. I thought they did a tremendous job acting. Yeah. So I think I want to talk to you about, so many different directions. You went through the CP MAP program, and you deepened your spiritual knowledge with an integration with psychology. I think I want to talk more. I mean, in some ways, we just spent some time in a very heady space talking about Lord of the Rings. So I want to get a little bit more personal.
Yeah.
Let's see how to phrase this question. What do you think people misunderstand the most about you as a priest?
Do you mean about me personally as a priest, or just priests in general?
Probably both together. Yeah. I think as one reality. Like, what are assumptions people bring to seeing you wearing that, which is a misconception of who you are, or I think, like, full stop, I think people forget that priests are human beings.
Yeah.
That's just a general principle.
Definitely.
So I guess let me frame it this way. Is there an element of your humanity that is lost because you're wearing a collar? Or is unseen because you're wearing, not lost, but unseen because you're wearing a collar? Are there ways that you feel misunderstood, or there are false expectations placed on you? What is the hardest part about being a priest? Talk to me about, like, what would you want the world to know about yourself?
Yeah. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is actually, it's not so much an element of my humanity that is forgotten, but exaggerated, right? I am not omnipotent.
Yeah.
I don't know everything.
Yeah.
And I think very often people look at a priest and they assume that the priest knows everything about them. That the priest has already made judgments about them, has already decided things about them. And so they get like defensive. I had this encounter once where I was going into a deli. I was going to get a sandwich.
Yeah.
And the door opened and I was still a few feet away from the door. And this woman walked out and she stopped and she looked at me and froze in her tracks and said, "I freak out every time I see a priest."
She said that to your face.
Yeah. And I was like, "Hello. Nice to see you."
I freak out every time I see someone who's not a priest.
But it was this, like, she was afraid. This wasn't like I get excited when I see a priest. I can't wait to go talk to a priest. It was, she was afraid of me. And I could see it in her eyes and I could hear it in her voice. And I felt bad.
Interesting that she articulated that, though. Most would avoid, right?
Yeah. But like articulated it immediately. And so I just, I'm sorry. I don't want you to feel that way.
Yeah.
And she's, no, it's okay. I gotta go. And then she just left.
Yeah. So
I have no idea whatever happened to that lady. I haven't been back to that. Leave. I haven't been back to the deli either. But there's this, I think people sometimes assume that I know a lot more about what's going on in their life than I could possibly ever know. And that I know it just by looking at them. Like
you have some sort of mystical superpower or something?
You must know what kind of person I am.
As if there aren't enough reasons for you to feel disconnected from people.
Right. Now you think I can read your mind and your soul too.
Yeah.
I mean, look, in the confessional, you notice certain patterns.
Sure.
Right. Like you just over time, and just like you would as a psychologist, you're doing therapeutic work with people, you're doing mentorship, you're going to understand certain things that are coming up, certain patterns of speech, certain things where you know exactly what question to ask. And it makes people think that you could read their mind. Yeah. You can't read their mind, but you're pretty close. Yeah. And you can get to that point too, as a priest, where you just know what question to ask.
You can size people up quickly. Yeah. But that doesn't, it's not the same as someone participating in unveiling themselves to you. Yeah. That's a different dynamic. Mm-hmm. You can't just know everything there is to know. But yeah, we can size people up pretty quickly.
The other thing I think that people often worry about or misjudge about priests is that we're way more concerned. Concern maybe isn't the right word. But that we're going to be far more dismissive of them if we know something about them. So it's not just that they think I already know about something about their personality or their lifestyle or something like that. Yeah. It's that they think that by virtue of that fact, like if I know about that, then I want nothing to do with them.
So they're unlovable if they make mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of people's images of God get projected onto priests. There's a little kid in religious ed who, when he leaves, he says, "Goodbye, God," and he waves to me. Yeah. And I have to keep telling him that I'm not God. He doesn't believe me. Yeah. He's like, "No, you are God." Yeah. Fine, but I'm not, just so we're clear.
Yeah, I think this dovetails into another line of inquiry I had for you, which is about, I can't imagine, I would feel a tremendous pressure to not scandalize people, to not make mistakes.
Oh, constantly.
To present myself a certain way. Yeah. And which I think is very unfair. I think it's very unfair. Yeah. Because that it loses the humanity of who you are. And in a certain set, I think we have to go deeper into the question of why people place those expectations on the modeling that you are to provide or the standard that you are to bear. Because I get it in a certain sense, like you are supposed to be an example in people's minds of virtue and holiness. But really, that's a desire for God. If I'm looking up the hierarchy, I have this desire within me for this perfect person who's going to love me perfectly. And I become disillusioned when I realize that they're not perfect. So it's almost like, is it the healthiest thing for the priest to play into that false projection? Like, would it not be more appropriate for you to let your hair down a bit more? Or is like, where's the line between you being real and authentic and having a drink and talking about Lord of the Rings and, oh, now someone's scandalized?
Right.
It's probably a tricky line, right?
It all depends on the situation and the thing that you're doing. But yeah, that fear of scandalizing people, I would say that's high on my list. If I'm looking at insecurities or fears, it's that something that I do or say is going to cause a scandal, and that, like, at my weakest moment or in a moment when I'm not at my absolute best, that's going to be the thing that forever puts somebody off from the church
Or from God.
Yeah. Like the number of times you talk to somebody who says that they had a bad experience with the priest. Like, the priest was rude to me.
Yeah.
And I was really struggling.
Yeah.
There's not much wiggle room for the priest to have a bad day as a human being.
So much pressure.
It's a lot of pressure, yeah. And you start to realize it. Now, I don't have an issue though with the idea that priests have to be held to the highest standard, because there's a reason that a priest is held to high standards.
Mm-hmm.
What a priest is entrusted with is something sacred,
mm-hmm.
and is something that's beyond him, and he's not worthy of it. And ask any priest, we know our unworthiness very, very well.
Yeah.
So there's a reason to hold a priest to a high standard that I think is valid, I think is important.
In the same way we would hold our parents to a high standard.
In the same way you'd hold a parent, a doctor,
yeah,
your lawyer. There are certain things that we expect of people who hold certain positions. We've started to soften on that, though, like in certain places. We don't expect the highest standards of behavior from famous people.
We assume the worst. It's the opposite.
Yeah.
We assume the worst.
Nobody trusts politicians.
Honestly, I feel like there are very few people in the world that I can look to as a role model, church or otherwise. I think we've lost, and perhaps we never could. And now we just have so much information that we see people's faults and shortcomings.
Yeah.
But at least when I was a child, I mean, Hulk Hogan could do no wrong. Yeah, then he became Hollywood Hogan. The rest,
Yeah.
But there was a time, I think, where maybe that was just my naivete I don't know. But it felt like more of people's shortcomings were covered up. And now we want to uncover everyone's shortcomings.
Yeah.
And then all the actual scandals in the church make your life pretty hard.
They do. But so those scandals make life harder and different. I want to come back to something that you were saying, though.
Yeah.
Like that sense of, I want to be able to look to people and admire them. I want to be able to trust them.
Yeah.
Right. That's a good human desire, right?
Sure.
We're actually hardwired for that.
Yeah.
We are meant to be in those kinds of relationships where we can trust people. And I remember talking to a priest, this is years back when I was in seminary, and I don't know why, I think my car broke down or something. And so it was in the parking lot of a church, and he's like, I'll give you a ride home. I was like, thank you. I really appreciate that. You're just going to have to tell me how to get there. I said, all right, well, I trust you know how to get to this place. And he goes, no, don't trust me. Trust God. And it was a joke, but it was serious at the same time. And it was a sincere spiritual lesson that I'm confident this priest would stand by if I told him that he told me that I should trust God instead of him. He would say, yeah, that's right. You should.
You remember it to this day.
I remember it. It stayed with me. Like this idea of, there's nothing wrong with trusting a human being.
Yeah.
But why should I trust that human being?
Right.
I should trust that human being because I trust God, and I trust that God has placed this person in my life.
Yeah.
Right. So why should somebody trust a priest?
Yeah.
Well, we should trust a priest because we believe that God has entrusted that priest with this care.
Yeah.
And that God has put this priest in my life for some reason.
Yeah. There's a proper ordering of things. We were talking before about, I can't get too far away from Tolkien. We were talking about how none of the characters are Christ properly speaking,
right?
But they're all sort of Christ. And I think what that speaks to, which I think the author had a sense of, was that we can participate in Christ's love and manifest him by becoming conformed to Christ. But whenever we do, it may feel like we are God to others because we are giving love to others. But we're only participating in something that we are not the source of.
Yeah.
So it's still him. And we can experience good in this world, but we're experiencing him in this world. And the person is the vessel or vehicle for that. The more more we decrease, that he may increase. The more we grow in holiness, the more we grow in psychological freedom and in our own uniqueness and spontaneity to love. Like someone can have a real experience of God, real experience of the Lord, but the person is still not him.
Right.
And so it's okay to give space for the both and of, this is a really good person that can manifest God's love in my life, and they're not perfect. And I can have a rounded shade of gray, not black and white thinking about this person's the greatest ever or the worst ever, or I thought they were the greatest ever, and then the moment I see their weakness or their shortcomings, now I'm going to villainize them. Right. It's like the more you see others through that proper lens of who they are, through those shades of gray, as we're on our way home to God, the more we treat ourselves that way. Mm-hmm. So one's a defense against pride, right? So I did an awesome job. Not I'm the best ever. It's I got some help.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a little boost from the Holy Spirit to like move me in that direction. Yeah.
Right. Or the other side, which is I screwed up. I'm not the worst ever. I tried my best. Right. It's a blending of the reality of goodness and not yet in terms of being perfected.
Yeah. And I think that we're dealing with a change in culture. So there was a time when you'd look at the priest as this is God's messenger on earth. Mm. And so culturally, there was a sense that priests can do no wrong.
Right.
The priests did everything, and nuns even more so.
My mother used to teach me that the homilies were infallible.
Yeah. So you have this sense, well, Father said,
yes,
therefore it must be true.
Yes.
He's the priest, and therefore he must be right. And it's really interesting because you talk to some folks and they'll say, like, my grandfather had a fight with our pastor when he was in his 30s. Mm. And it was kind of a big deal in the parish that my grandfather and the priest had an argument.
That nobody
argued with the priest, right? And I want to meet that grandfather. Like, thank you for arguing with the priest.
Yeah.
Because you probably needed it.
Sure.
So there can be an exaggeration of a priest's stature that is really unhealthy. Mm-hmm. If we think that this priest, he's got all the answers. So the priest can start to believe that about himself.
Yeah.
Right. But then we had this switch, because it wasn't just the priest that always had all the answers, right? It was anybody who had a position of authority was considered to have all the answers. And so we respect them by virtue of the fact that they hold this office, or they hold this position, or they have this kind of a job.
Definitely.
And we couldn't imagine them ever doing anything that's wrong.
Right.
Well, then you have in the
postmodern
in the 60s, basically,
but
it started before then. I don't want to blame everything on the 60s, but it started before then.
Yes.
The sense of we're going to throw off all of the tradition and all the authority.
Can't trust anything.
Right. Never trust anybody over 30. Now that I'm over 30, but the idea that anybody in authority should be tested, should be questioned, and everything else. And then what happens? But even those in authority, whether that's in secular professions or in the church, start to say, well, maybe we should try to be more human. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be more fully human, like be who you are, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of times what does it mean to be more fully human became an exaggeration of, I've got to get with the times and be more like everybody else.
Right. You lose the standard.
Yeah. There's a story that Fulton Sheen would tell about going to a college campus and talking to the students there, and having them tell him, Bishop, we were really tired of our chaplain. And so the first thing we did was we told him, look, you can't try to be one of us anymore. You got to stop. It's not working.
Yeah.
And so they sat him down, and the first thing they did was they cut his hair. Because this priest in the late 60s, early 70s had just let his hair grow long.
Yeah.
So he was doing the whole hippie thing and trying to be like them. And the kids didn't want that. These college students didn't want that from their priest. No, we want you to be our priest.
Yeah.
We need you to be a father to us. We don't need you to be just like one of us.
Yeah. Yes.
And a lot of times the mentality for priests was, we've got to be more human and relatable. But the problem is when you try to be someone that you're not, you end up being that person that you're not badly.
Yeah.
Right? You ever try to I really want to relate to this person, so I'm going to I want to use all their language. I want to do this.
You're not yourself.
No, go talk to some high school kids and try to use their slang today. Okay?
You ever see the meme that's like, hello, fellow youth?
Yeah. Hello, fellow youth. Exactly. Yeah. Let's get lit, fam.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work, right? It sounds wrong. I love doing that to kids though.
Yeah.
I'll pick up on certain phrases that they use. And I'm like, guys, tell me if the sentence makes sense to you. And I'll say stuff that they say, knowing nothing about what it means. And they get so upset. It's so much fun watching these high school kids just cringe and squirm and run away. Like, no, I can't hear you say that. It's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they know I'm just doing it to tease them.
Yeah.
But they don't want that from me either.
Yeah.
They don't want me to be just like them. They want me to be somebody else. But when we get into that habit, and I think this has happened to a lot of priests, and I've fallen into it myself. Right? I'm going to try really hard to just be relatable.
Which meets your natural human needs also.
It does. But that trying to be relatable on terms other than me being myself, being authentic, it means that in the attempt to be relatable, I'm spending so much energy on trying to be relatable that I'm not really relating.
Right.
I'm not actually present. I'm not actually with them. I'm so worried about appearance.
Yeah.
And that's actually what shows through. And so it becomes inauthentic. And so people start to think that priests are inauthentic.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Priests are just playing a part. They don't really mean it.
Yeah. It calls to mind the basic adolescent experience. Where, I mean, it starts at younger ages, but it's very much accentuated when the narrative or the request or the position of the adolescent is, don't tell me what to do. Because they're seeking autonomy. Yeah. They're seeking independence because they know they're going to wake up tomorrow and have to live life on their own. So there's a part of them that's individuating and separating from their parents. But they're saying, don't tell me what to do. But they're also saying, please tell me what to do. Yeah. Right. But not outwardly, but inside. Because, well, why? Because life is terrifying. They're entering into a brand new wide open space. It's like, Bambi coming out into the meadow. School is terrifying. Boys are terrifying. Girls are terrifying. Drugs are terrifying. High school is terrifying. Teachers are terrifying. Homework, college. So the teenager is terrified of the world. They're terrified of all these things. And they want some kind of frame. Mm-hmm. They want some sort of frame, and limitations and rules create security and trust. In our clinical work, we create a frame and we say, these are the rules within which I'm going to relate to you and care about you and love you. I'm not going to go outside of those rules. If I do, it's actually scary for you. Yeah. You may want to call me at 3 a.m. when you're experiencing distress. But if I let you start calling me at 3 a.m., now you can't trust me. It's actually anxiety provoking for me to say, sure, call me at 3 a.m. And so structure, frame, boundaries, authority does provide some security. So that's why you don't want your parent to be your friend, and you don't want your priest to be your friend when he's in the role of priest. Not that you can't have friendship.
Right.
Yeah.
The other piece of that is what happens when the priest doesn't provide those boundaries or that sense of structure or that sense of the priest being priest. Things start to depend too much on the priest, on the personality of the priest, on this and that and the other. And just like if you have a teenager whose parents won't parent, but instead are trying to be friends, what happens to the teenager? The teenager becomes parentified, right? They start to parent themselves somehow.
They make bad decisions.
Probably make bad decisions, right. Yeah. Or you see these kids who end up, at least externally, doing a ton of stuff that no teenager should be capable of doing.
Definitely.
But they learn the life skill, the practical life skill of taking care of themselves because they have to. Right?
But without wisdom, and they resent it.
Right. Well, this is what happens in like the life of the church. If priests won't hold to certain things and won't do things the right way, if they're so concerned about being relatable, people start to say, well, no, I don't want you to be relatable. I want you to be a priest. And I think this is what leads sometimes into this, and in a heroic way. This is a good thing. Like the laity will save the church, always, right? It's not, don't look for the priests to do it. It's going to be lay people who call priests to be who they really are.
Sure.
But you'll have like lay people who, I learned the rosary from lay people.
Yeah.
I learned Eucharistic adoration from lay people.
Yeah.
I didn't learn these great devotions from priests or from religious. I learned these really important pieces of the spiritual life from lay people who in my life said, this matters.
Yeah.
Right.
Just to follow your analogy there, I'm curious. It just dawned on me as you were speaking. As the child without parents begins to parent themselves, it would follow then that if a priest is not guiding people spiritually, then people spiritually parent themselves and make bad spiritual decisions.
Yep.
Certainly outside of, in the broadest sense, living outside of the world of religion. Sure. But I mean, even within a Catholic context.
The number of things that we as a church have like dropped the ball on teaching and teaching well has led to so many of the things that we see now. Demographic decline.
What do you think is number one? I probably the lowest hanging fruit is like the sexual ethic and theology of the body, right? But what else?
I think it's liturgical. I think liturgy has a lot more to do with stuff. So I don't disagree with you about the morality and the moral problem, because those are kind of sexy issues, right? It's exciting. We can talk about this in public now. We can have these discussions. Like there's something exciting about being able to debate at the coffee shop or in class or something like this, that we can have these kinds of discussions about these issues, and that this is a societal issue, and now the government's involved. So there's politicians involved as well. Maybe my faith has something to say to politics. I don't know. And we're trying to figure out, there's something exciting about that for sure.
Sure.
But no, I don't think that's the key thing. In fact, I think that those discussions would be very, very different if we got our worship right. If we worship God the right way, and I know I'm saying this wearing a cassock, so I'm going to get labeled. That's what happens when you wear a cassock. Oh, he's a trad, you know? But there are certain things about the way that we worship that have gotten a lot of our other teachings out of order. Because if we've started to pull back on this matters, this is a really important thing for us to do, then why is it important that we also live this way outside of that?
Yeah.
Right. So I would look at a few things as being very important. And these aren't in any particular, they're going to come to my mind kind of spontaneously, but I've thought about a lot of these things.
Of course.
One thing would just be the attention to detail in the celebration of Mass. We've all been to a sloppy Mass.
Sure.
We've all been to a Mass where like, I'm not sure the priest cares. Or why is the priest looking at me so much during Mass? Who is he talking to?
Yeah.
We've all been to a Mass where we're like, I'm not sure if anything actually happened because the priest freestyled so much that I don't know if he read any of the prayers out of the book that the church provides.
Yes.
Right. Fortunately, those days are few and far between now. Like that whole era has for the most part come to an end. It still happens from time to time, but for the most part, like guys are sticking to the book now. But like, all right, if Mass is something where the priest gets up and he's kind of the center of attention, he's the main event, and it all kind of depends on him, that's not super attractive because there's nothing transcendent about that.
I'll tell you, I don't have a dog in the fight in terms of Novus Ordo and traditional admin. I'm fine with all, whatever. I don't have passion about that. I see the beauty in all of it, but I'll tell you, the masses that I've been to that, in like a Ukrainian Catholic church.
Yeah.
I mean, just something as simple as the priest being on the other side of the altar changes everything emotionally for the participants in the Mass.
Yeah.
It feels so different to be gazing upwards with the priest.
Yeah. Well, they say that in the Ukrainian rite and the Eastern rite, you could hear everything that was being prayed,
Yeah.
but you couldn't see it because they go behind the iconostasis.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a hiddenness, there's a mystery liturgically to what they're doing.
Yeah.
Compared to in the Latin rite. Whereas in the Latin rite, you could see everything, but nothing was heard. So the mystery was in the silence. And that's a really interesting idea for me. And I'll come back to this idea of where the priest stands, because that's also a really important thing.
Yeah.
With that, so if the priest is celebrating Mass and it's kind of sloppy, then why should I care? Which means, why should I care about anything else that the church teaches? So why should I care if the church teaches me that stealing is wrong? Why should I care if the church teaches me that contraception is wrong?
Sure.
Like, why should that matter?
It's all sloppy.
If it's pretty clear that Mass doesn't matter, right? In the immediate post-conciliary years, you also had a gradual lack of attention to the sacrament of confession. Confession is a liturgy in and of itself.
Yeah.
And we stopped paying attention to confession even being something that people should really do. And so there's this long stretch of time where confession wasn't encouraged.
Yeah.
Now that's changing because I think people realize just the tremendous value of needing to be forgiven, of confronting your own sins and your own weaknesses, right?
I mean, sacramentally, but also just experientially.
Exactly.
To actually go and be like, hey, I messed up. Can I get Can I get some forgiveness here?
It's hugely helpful.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not as perfect as I want people to think that I am. And so I need the sacrament. Like, I need confession. There's nothing better than that. It's not always fun, but it's the greatest thing in the world, right?
I don't have resistance to it. I know a lot of people do, and I get it. But I'm like, I'm not kneeling down behind a screen. I'm going to look the priest in the eye. Well, I try to look in the eye, but I'm at least sitting in front of them, maybe with my head in my hands and saying, I messed up.
Yeah.
And it's great afterwards.
See, I find the screen, as a priest, I'm grateful for the screen.
Oh, okay. Because you don't want to get too enmeshed.
It helps me to keep the sense of, I don't care who you are, who's come to ask for forgiveness, in the sense that, like, your personal identity is not interesting to me when you're confessing your sins. Again, in a nuanced sense, it's not that I don't care about you as a person. I do, but I don't care about you because I know who you are. I care about you because of the burden that you're carrying.
Yes.
And the purpose here is not to focus on who you are, like my friend or my parishioner, the personal dimension, who, like, I really know. No, the whole point right now is to focus on the burden that you're carrying, so that you can experience the freedom that Jesus wants you to have.
Yeah.
And so that screen is tremendously helpful. I would say, I mean, we redesigned our confessionals when I did the renovation of the church, and 99.9% of people just stay behind the screen. They don't even ask for it to be opened, and we can open it. Like, so face to face is always an option.
Yeah.
But nobody really goes, and I think it's because it emphasizes the idea of what we're doing here is really not about you and the priest connecting on a personal level.
I mean, I'll say this: the screen does help you to focus inward.
Yeah.
You know, you're not worried about the priest staring at you if you're not behind the screen.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's helpful. The other piece of it, and this is a post Spotlight scandal, post Dallas Charter point of relief, that the screen is protection. The screen also means that, like, I know that I'm in the space. This is my boundary. It's a very literal boundary.
Yeah.
It's a fixed boundary. It can't be moved.
Right.
And the only way to move it is to do some serious construction damage, which means that if the only way to move this is to do some serious construction damage, then I feel actually very protected, not because I'm worried that somebody's going to attack me, but far more because I would worry that somebody's going to accuse me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You ever see I Confess, the Alfred Hitchcock movie?
I have not.
That's a fantastic one. I mean, maybe I should have had you watch that one, but
I'm glad you did not.
Yeah.
Go on.
It's about a priest who hears the confession of a murderer and then is framed for the murder. And because he knows who did it, he knows the identity, but he cannot. He's bound by the seal. He can't say anything
under threat of excommunication.
Right. But it's this very powerful testimony, and it's actually a really beautiful movie of how he holds fast And what's great is that it's a horror story in like the Alfred Hitchcock vein of horror that doesn't involve
birds.
It doesn't involve birds. It doesn't involve a psycho. It doesn't involve anything like that. It's just this. It's actually a faithful priest.
Yeah,
that's actually a really powerful one. Anyway, so I think when we stop emphasizing the importance of the liturgy and the importance of the sacraments, that starts to affect what we do. If you go back to the Mass though, and like where the priest stands. Okay, during Mass, who's the priest talking to?
God.
Right. Every prayer is directed to God the Father.
Yes.
Except for right after the Our Father, when the priest looks down at the altar and speaks to the Eucharist present in front of him and says, Lord Jesus Christ, you said to your apostles, peace I leave you, my peace I give you. All the other prayers are addressed to God the Father.
Peace of the Lord be with you always.
So there's the dialogues, which are different.
Yeah.
The dialogues, that's between the priest and the people.
Sure.
Right? But the prayers...
Oh, yeah.
The prayers are directed towards God the Father.
Yeah.
And so if the prayer is always being directed to God the Father, and the people are praying along with the priest, all right, if you have somebody facing you and speaking, who do you think they're talking to?
They're talking to the priest rather than God.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. If that person is, I had this experience once in Lourdes. We had a group of kids there who were volunteering, so high school students who were doing some volunteering with the sick and the pilgrims who came to Lourdes. But anytime you're volunteering at Lourdes, you have to go through these briefings at every event. And so you're standing there talking to a volunteer, and this volunteer was giving the spiel in French, and he's explaining everything. And so these kids are talking. These high school kids are talking because they can't understand French. So they assume he's not talking to me. And I'm like, guys, shut up. He's talking to you. Well, we can't understand. I said, he's going to speak English in a second. Wait for it. And they just thought that this whatever he was saying wasn't for them.
Yeah.
They didn't understand that by talking, they were distracting the French speakers from hearing what this man needed to say to them.
Yeah.
And this is immaturity of high school kids. It wasn't like, it's not a moral evil or anything like that. And then sure enough, he finished what he was saying and he switched to English, and he was British. He had this beautiful British accent and he explained everything like, oh, you really do have to pay attention to this stuff. It's important.
Yeah.
So we can have the false sense that we're the subject matter. But during the Mass, the subject matter is not us. The subject matter is God and us turning towards God. And so I never really understood this until I was a priest. I never had a strong feeling about it one way or another until I was a priest. And I started to realize that when I'm standing at the altar facing the people, I'm playing into that idea that I somehow have to be at the center of this. Not because I actually want that. I don't want to be at the center of it. I don't want people to be focused on me primarily. Maybe when I'm giving the homily, I want the attention, like, listen to me. I have great things to say. I remember seeing a pulpit once, and it was inscribed on the front with, do whatever he tells you. So they're quoting the Blessed Mother in John's Gospel at the wedding feast of Cana. Do whatever he tells you.
Listen, I've listened to your homilies, and I definitely noticed that there's a different part of you that emerges during a homily that I don't see outside of that context.
Yeah,
there is what's the word? Like, I mean, you're generally a charismatic guy, but there's an accentuated charisma that comes out when you're giving a homily.
There's a little bit, I think, in public speaking, right, where there's got to be a little bit of performance. So there's a little bit of the actor that comes out.
Yes.
There's a little bit of a performer that comes out.
Sure.
I think that's kind of normal when especially if you're trying to like rile people up. Like,
and I imagine the more homilies you do, it's not anxiety provoking for you to give a homily anymore.
No.
So now you're in this space of like, let's play around and let's be a little charismatic and find ways to.
What's funny to me is that like I don't have a problem getting in front of people, and like give me a microphone, I'm fine.
Yeah.
But put me in a room full of people who I don't know, and tell me to go socialize.
It's different.
I'd like to go home. I'd rather do that. So
there's less control.
I don't think it's less control. It's actually that I have to put myself out there more. Like there's more of an effort that has to be made to engage, whereas when I'm given a microphone, I don't have to make an effort to engage. I have a microphone.
You have to. Now you can't leave.
Yeah, exactly. I'm the one with the microphone. Everybody else shut up. Listen to me. Right?
I want to ask you a question too, and I'm not even sure how to ask this question or what I'm even driving at. Besides, I might just be complaining.
Complain.
I might just be complaining. Homilies are too long. I know you've heard it a million times, I'm sure.
My homilies are too long?
I mean, I haven't been. I'm not thinking of you directly, but yeah. I want to tell you, I went to, when I was living in Virginia, I went to this parish. I think it was St. Rita's, and I would go there, and there was this priest there that was beloved among the young adult Catholic community. Like, he was everybody's guy, you know, and everybody wanted his attention. He was kind of like his own mini celebrity, but not for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
But because he was a good man and he was a holy man. And
you can sniff out that difference real fast too.
Yes, for sure. And this guy used to stand up on Sunday and he would read the gospel and he'd start his homily. And I kid you not, he finished 30 seconds later.
That's amazing.
He would say, boom, this is what this is about. This is what the Lord is saying to you here. This is what we need to know. Go change your life.
Wow.
And he'd walk off. And you'd remember that all week.
Yeah.
It was so strong and poignant and powerful. And you sit there and you're like, is he allowed to do that? Like, is his bishop going to find out? Like, is that okay to do? Yeah. But I mean, it was like, he probably had a special gift for conciseness and like really penetrating the heart and penetrating what the scripture's about. And I'm not saying every priest should give a 30-second homily, but it just struck me how powerful that was when compared to, I think this also makes it really hard to listen to homilies. Our attention spans aren't what they used to be. I can go at most 5 minutes locking in, trying, and then my mind's like gone.
And you've got kids with you,
right? And I want to be sensitive to how, for a priest engaging in mass, that's the sacramental life. That's your bride, and your week builds towards that. And a priest wants to give all that they can to that homily. That's where they make the most impact on their spiritual children. Well, maybe not the most, but one of the most impactful contexts in which they give a homily. Impact their spiritual children and affect people and affect the world. So, I don't want to complain that much, but do you think there's something, like, what is your take on that? I'm sure you've heard people say, like, these homilies are too long. Like, Father, come on. Like, are you just like, no, you need to hear the word of God? Are you like, well, maybe I could have wrapped it up? Or like, what is your take on, not just it's also content. It's not just length, but it's the whole homily experience.
Yeah. So this priest that you're describing, not only would that be a gift to have that kind of brevity, to be so concise and so clear, but there's also a tremendous confidence that he has to have.
Sure.
I would be really interested to find out more about his own experience in prayer and his experience of just confidence that what he is saying is sufficient. Because we often don't have that kind of confidence in ourselves and our own message, or that God wants to communicate through that. So for him to be that brief is also, to me, that I'm thinking
the balls on this guy.
This guy must be confident in himself,
sure,
but not in a prideful way. This is a man, I would imagine, who has tremendous confidence that God will speak and he doesn't have to.
Yeah.
That's a gift by itself.
Yeah.
So short of having that gift, which I don't have, I know myself that well.
Yeah.
I think the other big piece with preaching is that a 3-minute homily that's delivered poorly or that's short of content feels like a 10-minute homily. And a 10-minute homily that's given with passion, with charisma, and that has content that's worth listening to feels like 5 minutes.
That's fair.
If you combine the worst of those elements, 10 minutes and lack of charisma, that's like a 30-minute homily right
It's
there.
brutal.
And it's not actually 30 minutes, but it just feels like it.
But
It
even,
feels terrible.
I mean, 10 minutes. I mean, there are priests that go far longer than 10 minutes.
Yeah. I can barely make 10 minutes most of the time. I would say 10 minutes for me would be like a long homily.
Yeah.
And I notice, I can tell people are like, what are you doing, man?
Their eyes are glazing
Yeah,
over.
you don't do this. You're not that guy.
Yeah.
Just sit down. Just cut it out. Right? Like they know. And I know when they're tired of me.
Yeah.
But that's the advantage that I have at my parish. I've been there now for 9 years.
You know everyone.
And more or less I know everyone, at least their faces. If I don't know their names, I know their faces. And so I've kind of figured out how to read that crowd. So like, yeah, generally I kind of
see the fidgeting and you're like,
it's time to sit down. It's time to cut this out. I get it. I'm here for it,
Yeah.
But in the Catholic world, a lot of our preaching has suffered too, because we're so short on content.
Short on content.
Yeah. So a lot of guys, and this is again part of that culture of like, well, we've stopped doing so many different things. So if we're going to go back to some of the stuff that we've stopped doing, well, then we also stop talking about some of the important things that people need to be doing, the way they need to be living their lives. If you stop doing certain things, you don't have to talk very much about, or if you are doing these things, you don't have to talk much about it, right? If you've got things like the rosary going and people know that they should be praying the rosary, and if you have regular confession hours with people coming to confession, you don't have to spend a lot of time explaining what the sacrament of confession does.
Or what the rosary is. My father always says, I haven't heard, since I was a boy, I haven't heard a priest talk about the rosary in a homily. And I think it's terrible that people don't know what it is. And that's, for some people, that's the only exposure they have at all.
Right. But if you've done the work to set people up with that stuff, or you've inherited that, you've come into a place where people are already
it's part of the
that,
culture,
then you don't have to spend a whole lot of time teaching that, which is a gift. And when you don't have to spend a whole lot of time teaching that, you can focus on other things.
Yeah.
That might mean you want to focus on some moral issues, right? Okay, let's get into it.
Even that takes courage.
It takes courage, because if we start to touch on moral issues,
somebody's
going to accuse us. Yeah,
you could lose people
and
very easily.
The worst thing that we've been taught as priests is that there is nothing worse than losing people. If your parish shrinks or if your collection goes down, that means you're not a successful pastor.
Is there no spirit of we need to prune in order to grow?
I think more and more that spirit is present, not in the sense of like, I want people to leave, but I think more and more we're accepting it.
Yeah.
Instead of fighting to keep people who don't really want to be there, who are looking for their excuse to walk away.
Yeah.
I would like to sit down and talk to the people who care.
Yeah.
And maybe, just maybe, that's going to make a difference. Like it's one thing that I take some pride in my own ministry, that at my parish, we've been able to do some things, and I learned through some significant challenge and often very weak moments of my own, and through some really supportive other brother priests who encouraged me. Like, sometimes you stick to your guns on something that isn't popular or that somebody's making a stink about, and see how long the stink lasts. And very often it's not that long. Very often the thing that they're upset about, they're the only one who's upset about it. But you know what they say? They come in and they say, Father, a lot of people are upset.
Right.
Well, tell me who they are.
Yeah.
Have them write to me.
Yeah.
Have them send me an email. I'd like to hear from them.
It's the loud minority.
Yeah. I would like to be able to talk to them individually. Please introduce me to them.
Yeah.
And they never do. When you start doing that, they never.
Yeah.
Maybe one extra person emails you, and then you stick to it.
Cool. Well, let's talk about the film.
Let's talk about the film.
Your movie of choice is Once.
My movie of choice is Once.
Now, was this choice calculated, provocative, or does this movie mean something to you personally and deeply?
I would say this is a movie that means something to me on a personal level. I really like this movie. And I was very motivated to try to pick a movie that you wouldn't expect me to pick, because I think that people think of a priest picking a movie and they have a certain category of movie that they think the priest is going to want to watch.
Okay.
I think,
like, for example, like what would be a typical Priesthood
I think
movie?
people would expect the priest is going to choose The Sound of Music or Bells of St. Mary's.
Something in Austria.
Yeah. they're going to like think the priest is going to want to pick a very Catholic movie.
Yes.
You know, like an explicitly Catholic, like it's a Catholic themed movie, like The Cardinal. We're going to watch The Cardinal,
Right.
Which, by the way, is a great movie. Or I Confess, Alfred, it's a Catholic movie. Like, yeah, I totally get it. But I wanted to pick something that was not actually explicitly religious.
Certainly wasn't explicitly religious.
No.
Tell me about what this movie means to you personally. Why? Why does this move you?
So I watched it for the first time when I was in seminary. Shortly after it came out with two of my seminary brothers.
This is a Sundance film.
I believe it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They won an Oscar too.
Hmm.
They won an Oscar for best songwriter, I think.
Well, that would make sense.
Yeah.
There's a lot of music.
There's a lot of music. So I watched this with two of my buddies in seminary that played music with me.
Hmm.
We had a little band in seminary, and so we'd play music a lot. And this movie came out, and it was about a guy who's a street musician and who goes on to record some music.
Yes.
And so we watched it, and there was just something about the passion that he sings with that was very moving.
Yes.
There was something there, something underneath it all. And you start to realize that there's a depth to what he's about and to what he's trying to get to. And then you also see this relationship that develops between him and the girl playing the piano and singing, and how that starts to happen. But you also see this, like, there's a strength in her that changes him.
Yeah. Yes. Let's slow it down.
Yeah.
So I just my first experience of watching him on the street, it was an interesting transformation within me as I heard him sing, because I had no idea what this movie was about.
Yeah.
I didn't watch a trailer. I didn't read a description. And my first response was like, this guy's kind of a bum. You know, he's a street musician. And then as I'm sitting there, I'm like, actually, he's got something.
Mm-hmm.
He's actually got something. Even lyrically.
Mm-hmm.
Lyrically, in terms of what is coming from his emotional core, there is something unique about this guy. He is some sort of singer-songwriter, and that is very difficult to convey on the street.
Right.
It's very hard to have anyone sit and listen to a singer-songwriter on the street. I mean, we've walked by thousands of them.
Right.
And it's not anything that make you stop and look. It's someone that is, I mean, there's a band of talented people, but then there are the outlier superstars that rise above that, and those are the best of the best. And he actually had something very unique to offer that I didn't pick up on until about like a third of the way or half of the way through the first song that he was playing on the street. So I was struck by how he sort of convinces you over time that he has something, because singer-songwriters typically lyrically, they're very cliched. They're very boring. It's all been done before. And he had a way with words of sort of bouncing around what he wanted to say. Mm-hmm. And it was very Bob Dylan in the sense that his lyrics could mean so many things to so many people. They're very like, they're abstractions almost. Yeah. That you could read your own interpretation into, which, I mean, it's Coldplay, it's Bob Dylan, it's some of the best are able to do that, and you can turn their art into your own art, and that's why they're as popular as they are. And he had that unique quality. So I just want to start with acknowledging musically, he was fantastic. Yeah. And I know, I mean, I'm no Bella Fleck, but I have a history of playing music myself, and I have an ear for it. I know you grew up in a family band?
No, my dad's a musician.
Okay.
And so I grew up playing music with my dad a lot.
Just personally?
Personally. My dad was in a band, and so the band was in my house constantly.
Sure.
So growing up, band practice on like, I don't know, one night a week. Yeah. These guys would be in my house. Yeah. So I was often falling asleep to the sound of a folk band playing in my living room. Yeah.
This is like bluegrass, right?
Bluegrass.
Or is it folk?
Folk, bluegrass, Americana, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And so do you play something now?
I play violin, guitar, mandolin, a little bit of ukulele.
Okay.
I'm not convincing on the ukulele.
Okay, cool. All right. So go on. So for you, the their dynamic was impactful, and that's what drew you in.
So their dynamic was impactful. I think at heart, every seminarian has this romantic streak, because part of our discernment is discerning celibacy,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so there's this idea of like, we're discerning a life where we will not be married. And so there's this sense of like romance is very important to us, not in a weird way, but like, you know, we actually value as when you're going through seminary, you come to value the idea of the romantic even more. Like when The Office first came out, and Pam and Jim kissed at the end of season 2, guys were like high-fiving in the halls because it was like, this is the greatest thing. This show's working out for us. Like finally we're seeing love lived out, because like every priest, when you're doing marriage prep, you want that couple to like, you want them to make it, and you want that life to be really happy and everything. So like you're pulling for it, but there's something in this dynamic that you're like, okay, the setup is really clear. Boy meets girl.
Yes.
Okay, well then they're probably going to fall in love. And there's a dynamic. But
well, I think they do fall in love.
They do, but it's so different the way it happens.
It is.
It's not like your typical story, and that's what drew me into it.
Yeah.
Was how different it was. I love, first of all, that one of those opening scenes, he's singing on the street, but it's at night, and he's just belting this song. It's his song. It's his song.
Yeah, it's not. He's
and
not doing the
absolutely
covers.
Singing his heart out, and she's the only one who stops, and she listens to him.
Yeah,
and you almost see him not really sure how to deal with this. Yeah, like their interaction is super awkward. That first interaction,
not for her.
She is totally herself, and this is why she's so important to this whole thing.
Yes,
but her wounds come out later. But she's the only one who stops, and he doesn't really know what to do with the fact that she stopped and actually wants to engage with him.
Yeah,
because he's used to being ignored.
Yes,
he's used to having his music ignored, but she pays attention.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's this might be very culturally insensitive, and it's very anecdotal, but I do have this vague sense that there's a certain directness that comes from Eastern European cultures.
Yes,
where he's Irish. He's a bit more Western, and he's kind of beating around the bush, and with not shifty eyes, but he's just kind of, his gaze is here and there, and she's like, what's the name of the girl that you love? Like, right. This is a song. Right. Who is it about? Did you fall in love with someone?
That by itself is so impressive.
It's very, she's had a directness to her and a clarity that's piercing to him.
Yeah. But think about this too. She realizes that this is a song that he wrote for a girl he loves.
Yeah.
English is not her first language. No. And he sings it, and he's got an accent when he speaks, when he sings.
Yep.
And his words aren't always super clear, a little bit of the Bob Dylan coming out, right? Yeah. She understood what that song was.
Yes, she did.
Even though it's not her language. And that tells you that there's something about music that conveys a message that's very powerful.
Yeah.
And this, like, as a musician, really spoke to me.
Yes.
Like, somebody who loves music, like that power of what can be conveyed by the way that you sing, by the way that you play, and you see his guitar and it's got holes in it. It's so beat up. I mean, it's so beautiful to see that.
Yes. Well, I think it says something about music, and I think it also says something about artists who have a very difficult time articulating themselves oftentimes. Mm-hmm. I mean, a real artist tends to be a little socially awkward, don't they?
Yeah.
They don't know how to engage in a healthy dialogue and communicative exchange with someone. But instead, that all comes out through their art and their artistry. And you oftentimes can't believe that the art produced came from that person, because you just experience them in daily life as just a little anomalous, a little strange, a little odd, a little tweaky, and then you experience their art, and it's profound. And you're like, wow, where did that come from? But that's because that's the only way that their interior experience emerges. Now, I want to say something about art too, because this is very, very psychological, which is, the basis for the Rorschach. You know the Rorschach, the ink blot test. You know what those ink blots are?
They're just ink blots.
They're just ink blots. But people see all sorts of things.
Yeah.
So, and it's an example of how art gets beneath your cognitive, conscious functioning, gets down into the unconscious, drags it up and projects it.
Yeah.
There's a reason why I only cry during film. I mean, not always, but for me to be the most emotional, it's kind of in the dark, and there's something that resonates with me that gets underneath my unconscious, and it's thematic. I can tell you what are the themes dynamically in films that make me start to well up with emotion. Art does that. I mean, it's film, it's paintings, and of course it's music. Music, I think, to your point, is one of the most obvious emotional bridges. The music taps into emotion, and you find a counterpoint within yourself, outside of yourself.
Yeah.
And that's why we'll like a song on a given day, but on the next day, we don't want to listen to that song anymore because our mood state has changed.
Yeah.
We're looking for some kind of resonance for our interior experience that includes elongated vowels. Right?
Yeah.
Emotions there's an elongation. It's not pinpointed, sharp cognitions.
Right.
I mean, there is music that is that way with sort of staccato type of music, but like the real deep emotionality that music elicits from us is it's a counterpoint for our emotional life.
Right.
And it pulls up our unconscious. The two of them didn't speak that much.
Right.
All of their connection happened emotion to emotion, heart to heart, and was expressed through the music.
Right.
And go ahead.
Well, so this is where the emotionality that they're able to express through music leads to them being able to form a relationship.
Yes.
So they're relating to each other. Like there's this moment when they're in the music store and she's playing the piano, where he's watching and something's clicking for him as he's listening to her.
Yes.
And she's not playing something original. She's playing something by Mendelssohn.
Yes.
But he's moved by what she's playing and the way that she's
her
playing
expression
it.
of yeah.
Yeah. So he's entering into that expression of it. And he like gets down on his knees next to her as he's listening to her. And then she invites him, why don't we play one of your songs?
Yeah.
And so he's kind of being invited into something where nobody else was paying any attention to his music.
No.
They weren't interested.
No.
But now she wants to know his music. Are you sure?
Yeah.
So he's sucked in now.
Yeah.
Like he's got to do this.
Yeah.
So he teaches her a song. And there's this moment where, and I don't know if you've ever had this when you're playing music with somebody and you want to try something.
Yeah.
Let's try to play this. And it just happens.
Yeah.
Something clicks where you and this other musician are playing together.
Yes.
It's
not thinking.
It's just happening.
You're not thinking.
And there's a way that there's a back and forth happening that's really powerful.
A communication.
And it's working. You know? So the guys who I watched this with, who I played music with all the time, that was what it felt like the first time we sat down to play music.
Yeah. It was
like
just that
we were introduced to each other.
Musical chemistry versus musical differences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we realized that we could do some stuff together.
It's an emotional chemistry.
Well, it bonded us together as friends, such that years later we had the chance to get together, like long after ordination, and we all had some instruments and we sat down and played, and it was like not a day had gone by, and it was such a gift.
Yeah, I mean, in the film, I think there's this mystery or question mark around whether or not they're connecting musically or connecting romantically.
Yeah,
like throughout the whole thing, and only when there are moments later on. I think it begins with confusion over that right in the beginning.
Right.
Because he's like, do you want to sleep over?
Yeah.
Do you want to have sex with me? And she's like, no, this was not about that. This was about the music.
Right.
She kind of like splashes water in his face.
I love her ability to set boundaries. She knows who she is. And she sets that boundary.
Yeah.
And so she leaves. Then when he finds her and apologizes and everything, the next day they're sitting on the steps at her apartment because he's gone over there and he's met her mother and her daughter, which he was not aware that she had a daughter.
Right. She's like, basically to me that was saying, do you know what you were asking when you asked me to stay at your house?
Exactly.
Like, you really want this?
Yeah.
And actually that becomes later on, not to get too far ahead, but later on that becomes the ultimate obstacle. Come with me to London. Can my mother come? No.
Yeah.
You don't really want all of me in my life.
Right.
You want what I can give to you that makes you feel good in the moment.
Yeah.
when I got to the end of that film, I was not happy. I was not happy at all. It's a lot like La La Land.
Never seen it.
I haven't seen it either, but my wife is furious about it, and I've heard enough to know that they don't get together in the end.
Yeah.
And what's the other
one?
Were
you rooting for them to get together?
Well, I'm always rooting for them to get together.
Yeah.
I guess that's why I was upset.
Yeah.
I'm always rooting for. I mean, we follow a love story, boy meets girl, mm-hmm. and I think we're built for loving communion. And I'm sitting there as it ended, and I'm sitting there, and I'm dropping F-bombs. Like, why did he make me watch this?
By the way, speaking of dropping F-bombs, the greatest line in cinematic history is in this movie.
Which one?
She's got the Discman, and it dies.
Oh,
and she's F you batteries.
Yeah. Yeah, that was
the
funny.
Greatest line.
That was funny. But as the movie ended, I was like, wait, what? Like, why the F would Father Sam make me watch this movie? And I've really been like churning it over in my mind and thinking about it. And what I've come up with or thought through, or I mean, you tell me if I'm way off, but something that came to my mind is I'm wondering if this isn't completely disconnected from the experience of celibacy, which is that as a priest, one engages emotionally in the lives of the faithful, mm-hmm. in the lives of particular women. And at the end of the day, there's no romantic communion. And we were talking a little bit about a deepening of the concept of celibacy based on books in the CP map. But one thing I don't think is given enough attention for priests is that earlier you had said celibacy is a gift. It's a gift itself. That is the gift. Rather than free me up to give a gift, like it is the gift. We don't give enough attention to the grief that comes with giving the gift.
Sure.
Like it is a beautiful opportunity for a deep intimacy with God. But we know theologically that is also it's to illustrate that the love between a man and a woman is just a sign for that deeper intimacy with God. It's a signpost on the way to the location that we're going to.
Yeah.
And okay, say that's all true. How much time do we spend talking about the grief of the appropriate emotional response to letting go of something very good, and which is sadness because of the loss of communion with a woman? It's awful. Do we actually sit and empathize with how awful it is?
Yeah.
It's good on one hand. It's a both hand. It's very good. But it's also awful that you can't get married and have children. It's also amazing and blessed and wonderful. But so many priests, I think those feelings are repressed. Over and over again, I've experienced working with priests. They don't give enough time to the grief and sadness at what they're choosing to give up for God. It's a painful, painful thing.
Yeah.
And so when I'm watching this film, that twinge of pain that I experience, like, oh, they don't get together. Well, that's your entire bloody life. I'm wondering if there's a part of you that was like somehow unconsciously identifies with like almost, but no.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's really interesting. I don't know. I think first time I saw it, there was disappointment at the ending. But then there was also this instinct to figure it out. Like problem solving mode went really strong for me. I've got to figure out what was really happening. And I too was rooting for them to be together.
Yeah.
Right. But at the same time, I started to realize, no, what I'm actually witnessing here is there's some natural virtue coming out here.
There's a purity.
There's a purity that's very beautiful.
If not yet purity, purification.
For sure, purification.
Yeah.
I think definitely purification. But there's like a fundamental goodness in each of them that the other one is helping to draw out.
Yes.
And I think sometimes when that fundamental goodness starts to come out.
Yeah.
It can be mistaken for that emotional affection and love.
Well, it's appreciation of
Right.
the other, of the good of the other,
Right.
which is the basis for love.
Right. But it can be mistaken in an erotic sense of now we have to have a physical bond as a result.
That's not tempered by I want what's good for you.
Exactly.
It's purely eros.
Exactly.
Without agape. When we know that real love is a mingling of those two.
Right.
I want you. I see you. I see your goodness, so much so that I want what's best, even if it means that I suffer.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And at the beginning, that's all he wants is the erotic. He's not really.
He's confused.
He's confused.
Yeah.
He's struggling.
Yeah.
But he's like, maybe that will satisfy.
Sure.
But deep down, he kind of knows that it won't. And then as the whole relationship progresses, she starts to move in that direction herself. But then there's that great scene where he goes, "Wait, you're married?" When she explains that, yeah, in fact, I'm a married woman. My husband's not here. I've got a daughter. I've got my mother and my daughter are here with me. And that's shocking to him.
It's shocking to the viewer.
Yeah, because you weren't expecting that.
Yeah. And there is sort of a way out of the marriage, isn't there? He doesn't love me. He's all the way over there. He doesn't appreciate me. We got married really quick because I got pregnant. I mean, even from a Catholic perspective, so was it a free sacramental marriage? Yeah. You can start like playing with those ideas in your mind.
Right. I saw this when I was in the seminary and we're learning canon law and everything. Yeah. So you start doing that analysis. Yeah. But it's not that different than in his situation. Well, maybe she cheated on him. Maybe something wasn't working, and so they've got this brokenness. So they're both coming from some place of brokenness within that context of those relationships.
Yeah.
But then what do you see happen? Well, as he gives her the confidence also, like he invites her to write the lyrics to a song.
And when she writes it, you're not sure if she's writing about him or about her husband.
Exactly.
Turns out it's her husband.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But it could kind of go either way.
It could go either way.
Yeah. And then you realize sometimes as he's singing to her.
Yeah.
Not really. They also have this moment, and I'm a nerd. I looked it up. I wanted to know. She says something to him in Czech while they're standing looking out at like this beautiful
vista. And then she doesn't tell him what it is.
And she doesn't say anything.
What is it? I didn't look it up.
So he asked her about her husband.
Yeah.
Do you love him?
Yeah.
And she responded in Czech, "I love you."
She did?
Yeah.
Oh.
So she confesses like that she loves him.
Yeah.
But see, I think again, and maybe this is the CP map speaking through me here, but I think that both of them were a corrective experience for the other.
No, I think that's right.
So like to realize I'm worthy of being loved. Someone can see me for who I really am, can recognize my gifts and my talents, and will allow me to be me.
Yes. Right? I think that is true. I think
that's the banker song, right?
Yeah.
I want to be me. Yes. I want you to be you.
Yes. Yes. I think that is true. I think that is a dimension of their dynamic. I still can't let go of this feeling that he is not a man, that there's a boyhoodness to him, and that he's not like, if you truly, there's a selfishness, and if you truly love someone, like the only thing that actually prevented the happy ending was when he said, "Come with me to London," and she said, "Will you? Can my mother come?" And he said, "No." If he had said yes, they would have been together. But he wasn't willing to accept all of her. He wasn't. It's still like about my music. Yeah. It's still about me. It's about this fantasy life of us together. Like he couldn't enter into the reality of that little apartment with her daughter and her mom. Yeah. Like that's not really loving for her. It's the idea of her. And then further, so he's like, "Why don't you come over later?" And she doesn't show up.
But what's he doing?
He's buying her a piano.
No. Even before, he's standing outside waiting for her to show up.
He's waiting for her to show up.
Like hoping maybe that next car that comes by, maybe that'll be her.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. No, but I just think he's confused. I think there's some pure love in there, but I think there's a boyishness and an immaturity there.
I agree.
But then at the end, after the last scene of the whole thing, she's like wistfully looking out the window on her piano, like thinking of him. And it's not like resolved for her. The look, what I interpreted in that last scene, it didn't seem resolved for her. It felt like she was thinking of him.
Yeah.
And like, and like, there's a part of her that still wishes he was like, come to London with your mom.
Did you spoiler alerts on this? Like, just in case people haven't seen the movie, but
No, I mean,
it's fine.
Yeah.
Because one of the last things that she says to him before he leaves
yeah.
is, I talked to my husband.
Yes.
And he's coming over.
Yes.
And so in that last scene when she's got the piano and
Yes.
she's in that, like you see her in the apartment,
Yes.
her husband is with her.
Yeah, he kisses her on the head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's this.
So why is she wistfully looking out the window when her family and her husband, her deep desires, are in the room with her?
Right. I think of that as it's the look of gratitude.
Oh, we're both looking. We're reading it differently.
Oh, we definitely, yeah.
And this film leaves a lot for projection.
Well, what are their names?
I don't remember.
They don't have names.
Oh,
that's the other really cool thing.
It's kind of like
movie.
A blank slate kind of experience. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, my preferred movies are comedies. Mm-hmm. If I'm looking to sit down and watch a movie, I want to watch something that's just mindless and is going to make me laugh.
Yes.
Like just fart jokes. I'm happy.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
But this movie strikes something differently, and you start looking at it going, all right, what's the symbolism there? And what else are they going for? The fact, like, it took me, I think, 3 watches of this to realize that they don't have names. Mm. It's boy and girl. And that's it. But even that, in the credits, they're listed as boy and girl.
No kidding.
What's that tell you? You're right, he's not a man.
Yeah.
You're right.
And she's still a girl.
And she's still a girl.
Yeah.
In fact, when they made the movie, she was still 17.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So there is an immaturity about them.
Yes.
And that's actually kind of the point, I think.
Yeah.
That the music is helping them to mature. And actually this relationship helps them to mature also.
Yeah.
As immature as they are, and he more than her.
Yes.
He's definitely more on the...
Well, maybe.
I think that she has a groundedness that he doesn't have.
Yeah.
She's more realistic about what the world looks like.
Yeah, I think so. You're right. Yeah.
But he also has something that he can really offer. Mm-hmm. And again, I think when she's
emotional
got that
availability.
Look,
I mean, availability
for one thing,
emotionally and physically. He's there. He wants her there.
Yeah.
And whereas her husband's, I'm not willing to do anything for you.
Right.
Which, I mean, again, going back to him not bringing her to London, he said, I'm not willing to give all of myself for all of your life. That's exactly what the husband said initially. I'm not going to, my daughter, I'm not going to go with you to Ireland to be with my daughter and your mother. I'm going to stay in my own world.
Yeah.
Talk about the husband being a child.
Right.
And being immature.
Right.
And this was a replay of that for her. But he could have changed everything.
That's so interesting because I looked at that whole conversation when they're talking about going to London as the two of them building a fantasy and then dismantling it together.
Okay.
So they throw out this idea. Yeah, we'll go to London.
Oh yeah, they were playing,
and we'll disappear.
Yeah, they were playing with
it.
And we'll make a record, and we'll be
Yeah, and then we'll make a record. We'll have a band, and we'll be famous. Well, which is it? Are you going to go to a big city and disappear, so nobody will ever find you, or are you going to become famous?
Yeah.
Because both of those things don't make sense.
Right.
I should kind of bring my mother, and he goes, "Oh, come on," because that's reality. She's bringing reality into the fantasy.
Yeah.
I think that's what he's actually doing. Is saying, no, I don't want to leave the fantasy right now. It's nice to have a fantasy with you. It's nice to think about this thing that could be.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And like,
does he say, "Oh, come on"?
It's in the eyes. I think it's in the eyes. I don't think he actually says it. It's there's a lot communicated in the glances that they have.
Yeah.
Which is also very powerful.
Yeah.
Right? I think that whole conversation is the two of them giving voice to this fantasy that they're holding interiorly. And then realizing, even as they're talking about it, this is insane.
Yeah.
And in that moment when she says, "Can I bring my mother?" That's the moment that the whole fantasy crashes to earth. And he goes, "I wanted to stay in the fantasy world. I wanted to stay in the land of make-believe."
Well, what do you make of him asking her to come over his house later, though?
I think that's him still trying to hold on to the fantasy. Like, maybe this could happen. And when she doesn't come, he realizes, nope, I made a decision.
Why did he buy her a piano?
I think
given everything you're saying,
is
that fantasy or reality, or how do you perceive that?
I think that's a gift. I think that's the desire to give to someone something because of what they've given you.
Yeah.
So she doesn't have a piano of her own. He has his guitar.
Yeah.
He can sing. She can sing, but she doesn't have. She has to go someplace else to play the piano.
Yeah.
She has to go and ask. She has to beg. So he doesn't want that for her. He knows what she has. He knows the gift that she has, and he's actually affirmed it, right? By inviting her to write one of his songs.
Yeah.
He's like, I've got this melody. It's not right. I can't figure out the lyrics.
Yeah.
You want to take a shot at it?
Yeah.
And she writes this beautiful song.
Yeah.
I mean, it's gorgeous.
Yeah, it is.
And the way she sings it, the tone of her, like when she solos, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That voice is special.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
Yes.
And so as she's singing that, like he's invited her into that creative process, and he's invited her, and he's unlocked for her that what she has is actually a gift. You know, when she says to him on the street, you sing that song for her, you'll win her back. And in the studio, as she's singing the song, she says, my husband didn't like it. There was a song that she had written for her husband, and he didn't like it.
Yes.
But he's like, so now here's the boy, and he's giving her that encouragement. No, you should do this just the same way that she did that for him. Yeah. On the street. You should play this for the girl. Yeah. Well, the ex-girlfriend wants him back, it turns out. There's something there. There's something that actually did work. Yeah. But for whatever his immaturity was, he couldn't go for it. So it was for me, it wasn't so much a celibacy comment. It was more I want to see these relationships work. But I'm interested in this idea of the celibacy part because I never thought of it that way until you're talking about it. And that's fascinating.
Unconsciously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd ever thought about that.
Like the limitation that where you have to stop with every woman. Yeah. Every single woman. You can't go any further. Right. But you can have a deeply emotional experience, but then you rub up against that boundary line. Yeah. Because of your commitment and your virtue. And then you have to make sense of the boundary line. Right. And what does that boundary line mean? Well, then it obviously, probably on your best day, that points you to God. Yeah. Right. Maybe on your worst day, you're like, man, it sucks that I'm not married. You know? And it's that other part, that desires family life, which of course a healthy priest should want that. It is a wonderful thing, which, going full circle back to my other point, which is I don't think we give enough space for priests to grieve what a gift it is, because there's such a natural consolation that comes through marriage and family, and it's a loss, grief that it just gets minimized and swept under the rug and invalidated, and it's proposed that it should just be sublimated into your spiritual life. Like, it sucks. We never. This is whenever we're working with someone who has trauma. Yeah. I was working with a religious sister one time, and she had an awful, awful traumatic experience where her sister died. And it was just awful. I won't go into details, but it was awful. And I was in her, like, while I was seeing her sister die. She used to come to me for other reasons, and then her sister died. And we were her biological sister, and we were going through the depths of grief. I mean, like a grief observed C.S. Lewis level grief, real depth. And one of what I learned from her and what she learned from me, because we were in it together, was that two things can be true. Yeah. One of the biggest dangers in the Catholic world, of course, is to invalidate someone's suffering by just giving spiritual platitudes. And I mean, just as simple, even in my own life when I was a kid and I was ticked off about something and all I heard was offer it up. Yeah. Like that's
doesn't help anything.
In nascent form, that's what we're talking about later when we go through deep suffering in our lives, which is, it's awful, full stop. It's always awful. You lost your mom, whatever it is, whatever the tragedy is of your life, the trauma, it's always awful. Separate lane entirely. God can draw good from it. Yeah. But we can acknowledge both are true. Right. So to me, my heart grieves for the priests who aren't able to, number one, experience it, but even be allowed to say that it's awful that I can't.
Yeah, so I don't think I've ever really thought in those terms.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting take, because I think to recognize celibacy as a gift and as a way of giving of oneself.
Yes.
There's no secret as to what it is that we give up.
Right.
Like, it wasn't like I was ordained and then told, oh, by the way,
Yeah.
no wife or kids.
Right.
No, I knew.
Yeah.
I knew that part.
Yeah.
I didn't know the full depth, and I still don't know the full depth of the joy of family life and everything that you have as a father, as a husband, right?
Yeah.
And I won't know that, and like I get that
Mm-hmm.
that there's this piece that's unknown.
Well, maybe you won't know that.
Yeah,
the way the church today nowadays, there's pushback against that. But
I don't know that I see it as a grief, so much as I do need to understand this, right? But the other piece is celibacy. It's not just a gift and a way of giving of myself. Mm-hmm. Celibacy is a charism, which means it's something that is given to you by the Holy Spirit. So if celibacy is a gift that's given to you,
yes,
it's something powerful. You know, Band of Brothers?
I do.
And when he meets the Belgian nurse, when the medic from Louisiana meets the Belgian nurse in the field hospital during the Battle of the Bulge.
Yes.
And he says, your touch calms people. And that's a gift from God.
Yeah.
And she says, God would never give such a painful gift. Right? It's a powerful line because she's recognizing that she knows that she has a gift to heal and to calm people down. Right? But he says it's a gift from God. And she can't accept that God would do, because she's so traumatized by all of the carnage that she has seen.
Yes.
Right? In a different way, we might say God would never give such a terrible gift.
Yes.
Right. But it's not a terrible gift.
No.
It's such a good gift, right?
Yeah. And I think all of that is situated in this hand, which is the sublimation and the beauty of celibacy. I'm just highlighting that
on the natural level.
On the natural level, we don't allow space to be sad.
Yeah.
Just to be sad about like having to.
So that's where I think maybe because we do allow space, maybe that is actually more talked about than you'd realize. At least
within a priestly community,
within either priestly community or within even in seminary formation.
Probably depends on the priest, the seminary, and the community.
100%.
Because I've heard priests who are like, it's awful and no one cares.
Yeah,
I've heard that narrative too.
Yeah, I think the other piece is if priests have good relationships with families, then they have the sense of it to know what the gift is, but it also changes the grieving. Like I spend time with families. That's the most beautiful thing in the world, right? And it's like to be around these people and to like have them tell you what they're experiencing, to have their kids come and talk to you and like love you. There's a picture that Dr. Greg has of, I went to visit him and his kids I sat down in a chair and all the kids attacked, and so it's me sitting there and there's a whole bunch of kids everywhere. You can barely see me because they just piled on top, right? So like, I'm just in this chair covered in his kids. It's insane.
Beautiful.
But there's something beautiful about it, right?
Yeah.
Man, let me tell you, there's something so beautiful about going home that night also.
Yeah.
There's something so beautiful about knowing that I'm sleeping through the night because I don't have a whole bunch of kids who are going to wake me up. And like, there's something beautiful about that.
That is a responsibility and a cross that comes with being married too.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And so it's because you're invited into that you can also take that human grief, but you can measure it against it. There's a Graham Greene story where he talks about a priest who was visiting this couple, and the couple would come to visit the priest. And when they'd come to visit the priest at his rectory, he lived alone, and he had lots of hobbies. For that time when he wasn't busy with parish stuff, he had lots and lots of hobbies.
Yeah. And
the whole story revolves around the fact that the husband deeply envies the priest for his capacity to have all these hobbies and all these interests and like a telescope and all this cool stuff, all these gadgets and all this time, right? Yeah. That's all he wants. And the priest deeply envies the husband because he has a wife.
Yeah.
And there's this mutual envy that's happening there. And you read that and you realize, wow, if it's possible actually that it's, you know, marriage is great, marriage is a gift, but marriage calls forth so many sacrifices also.
Sure.
If we can mutually understand the sacrifices that are there, like, yeah, they're there.
It's such a good point.
They're present, and grieve the sacrifice in the sense that sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it sucks to make the sacrifice.
Yes.
But in no way does that take away from the gift
Yes.
that sacrifice ultimately is.
Yes.
I have a guy in the parish, he refuses to talk about his marriage as a sacrifice. He's like, if I do this because I love my wife, it's not a sacrifice.
Yeah.
Sacrifice is supposed to hurt. This doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's got to hurt a little bit, right? Like, come on.
It's a mingling.
Come on. There's like, sometimes it hurts.
It's a mingling.
Yeah.
It's a mingling. Sometimes when you don't experience the desire, it's more raw suffering, but it's actually pretty rare. I can understand what he means, that it doesn't feel like a sacrifice, because most of the time, even though you're dying to self, it still also feels good. Like I have to stop what I'm doing to take time out to go discipline my kid, and when I'm trying to work. But like, I also love disciplining my kid in a way. You know, I love spending the opportunity to take time.
Because when you do that, it's good for your kid.
Right.
And you know that you're building your kid up.
Right. Yeah. Well, great movie choice. I mean, my big takeaway from this conversation is that there's a lot of blank slate in this film that creates opportunity for projection. And I don't think either, I mean, you know what I do for a living. I don't think either of us is right or wrong.
Yeah.
I think there's different perspectives in our own projections that were placed onto the art of the film in very like acute, in an acute sense with the songs, but the bigger picture of the film where, you know, a good artist won't tell you what their art is about, right? It's as soon as it's out of me, now it's yours to interpret through your own lens. And I think this film does a fantastic job of it. I can understand why it won Oscars. And, you know, as I'm sitting here too, you know, I always have, I'm reflecting on myself too. And I'm asking about like, well, why did I read into it that way? What does that have to do with my history and my projections? You know, so, I mean, that's what good art does. So
yeah,
I really appreciate the film choice.
I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah.
I'm glad you liked it.
Cool.
Yeah. It's a good one.
Well, absolutely loved having you join me.
Thanks for having me.
Anything you want to plug? God, Jesus?
Yeah.
Wait, what are you plugging?
Go to Mass on
of
Sunday.
Course, The Tangent.
Go to Mass. Yeah, I have a podcast called The Tangent.
And I was on it.
And Dr. Bryan was on it.
Yeah.
That was a fun episode.
That was fun.
That was a good time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tangent's available wherever you get your podcast. Look for my face.
Yes.
It's got a big logo on my face.
I think without the eyes,
it's just my beard. It's like the silhouette. There's no actual face there.
Oh yeah. We'll put it in the description of this and link.
It's been a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah, cool. That and The Tangent thematically is not really sure what we're going to talk about too much. We're just going to go on a tangent.
Yeah, we often have a jumping off point. Like we've had a lot of authors come on, so we talk about their books as a starting point. Yeah, and then we get into all kinds of other conversations as well.
That's so cool.
It's good stuff.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to have you back.
Thanks.
All right.
This is fun.
Thanks.